Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. I know we still have some people coming in. There's a slow elevator ride for most of us. Welcome to today's event on how can policymakers help build the Internet of Things. My name is Daniel Castro. I'm the director of the Center for Data Innovation. For those of you that don't know the center, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank focusing on the intersection of data, technology, and public policy. Our goal is really to see how we can use policy to drive forward many of the innovations that we're seeing around data. I'd like to thank all of our generous sponsors for today's conference: Toyota, Verizon, US Telecom, and Intel. These are all companies that I think really understand the future of the Internet of Things and why it's important that we have these conversations today. I also want to thank our media partner, the Christian Science Monitor, and Passcode, its new vertical that they're launching on cybersecurity and privacy issues. They do great work, and I encourage you to check out their website. The event today is being recorded and live streamed. If you're watching online, you can also participate using the hashtag Data Innovation. So we have a number of reports off to the side in the room over here. They're also available online. There's two that I want to particularly draw your attention to. The first report we actually released a year ago. It's called the Internet of Things, and it shows how this technology is being used today. We look at both products that are out on the market as well as some pilot projects that are being deployed all around the world. And what this report shows is that there's just a huge potential impact of this technology. When you look at the areas where it's having an impact, it's things like healthcare, transportation, energy, public safety. And these are applications where we're seeing being deployed to really address major social issues. And this is the reason that technology matters so much. It has the potential to transform a number of different industries and be used to address major social issues. The second report we actually just released this morning, and it outlines 10 public policy principles for unlocking the benefits of the Internet of Things. And the goal of this report is to give policymakers a framework for thinking through how they can use the tools at their disposal to promote the beneficial uses of this technology. And I see a lot of familiar faces in this room, so I know you've been to a lot of the same conferences and events in Washington that I've been to. And if you look at the conversation in Washington around the Internet of Things, a lot of it's been focused on kind of the risk and the concerns. And we think we need to change the conversation here. We need to be talking about how government can be an active partner in working with industry, working with the private sector, nonprofits, and academics to deploy this technology for useful purposes. So that's the goal of this conference today. That's the goal of the report that we released. And I hope we're going to have a very exciting conversation around that today. So we have a great set of speakers lined up. And to begin with, first, it's my pleasure to introduce Senator Deb Fischer. Senator Fischer is a member of the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee and a leader in efforts to reform Washington's regulatory approach to technology and innovation. She's the author of a number of forward-looking, innovation-friendly proposals, including the E-Label Act, which recently passed, the PROTECT Act, and HIRE Act, and she recently led a bipartisan group of senators in requesting an oversight hearing on the Internet of Things to help lay the groundwork for federal policies to promote growth and innovation in the economy. So please join me in welcoming Senator Fischer.
Thank you, Dan, for that very kind introduction. It is a pleasure to be here with you all today, and it is exciting to be here with you as well. I'd like to recognize the sponsors for stepping forward and helping to put on this conference to help educate policymakers, and also to recognize policymakers who are out there trying to think creatively about the development of the Internet of Things. Modern technological marvels have transformed the Yellow Pages and the telephone to a new reality of smart vehicles and the Internet of Things, and also those advanced communication systems. We all know that the next wave of technological advances is just around the corner. Mobile traffic is already 51 times greater than it was in 2008, and it's expected to grow 11-fold between 2013 and 2018. Before the iPhone was first introduced in 2007, mobile software applications didn't even exist. As my good friend Senator King from Maine says, just a few years ago, software was a mink coat. Now it's estimated that the apps economy is responsible for 750,000 American jobs. Intel has calculated that in 1 minute on the internet, almost 200,000 apps are downloaded. 4 million Google searches happen and 350,000 tweets are published. Who's tweeting right now? Be honest. Yay. And on average, every 60 seconds, tens of millions of text messages are sent while thousands of hours of online videos are viewed. These numbers are truly staggering. And what these modes of communication all have in common is that they generally require some human input to send or gather information on our networks. The information superhighway we know today is already at our fingertips, and it's easy to underappreciate its potential for even bigger growth. But the Internet of Things brings even more potential with new paths to knowledge. This transformative innovation is different because it facilitates the collection, storage, and exchange of that digital information. We're going to become even more interconnected. There's no denying its potential to connect tens of billions of objects, to generate trillions of dollars in value, and to contribute substantially to economic growth, productivity, and consumer welfare. If properly channeled, the Internet of Things can be a game changer for the United States. It can change our economy, and it will affect the American consumer. In many ways, the Internet of Things is consumer empowering. Google's Vint Cerf, an early Internet pioneer, described the Internet of Things as a feedback loop, a means by which people get feedback that tells you something about the consequences of the choices of your behavior. The most obvious example is the wearable devices such as Fitbit, or those sleep sensors that monitor how much you walk and what your sleep patterns are. That helps you to measure activity, goals, and other functions. It gives people more information. It gives you better tools to analyze the data so that you can make more informed choices. It doesn't force consumers to make decisions. It gives them new insights into their daily lives and their business operations. In this discussion, I think the main question that we have to ask ourselves is this: who's going to see the benefits that result from the Internet of Things? Is it going to be the United States? Is it going to be China or India or someone else? This question is important because of the possibilities that technology holds for us, because of the possibility and how that potential will shape public policy. With the explosion of big data and increased connectivity, our immediate attention and careful analysis is required. One study concluded that in 2013, 90% of all data in the world had been generated in the previous 2 years. That's one of the reasons why I've taken the leadership role in introducing a series of bills in the United States Senate in order to keep the United States ahead in that global innovation curve. One bill I introduced was mentioned, the HIRE Act. It would promote opportunities by requiring the Federal Communications Commission to approve those new technologies within 1 year. To most people, that may not seem like a big deal, but I assume that each and every one of you in this room realizes the big impact that would have because of the changes that we see with this new technology. I think this also introduces accountability, and it definitely will speed up government responsiveness. I also introduced the E-Label Act. Very pleased that that was just signed by the President. And as you know, that will modernize those labeling requirements on our electronic devices. Likewise, low-risk health IT deserves to have a modern regulatory regime, one that's going to promote innovation, one that's going to support jobs and growth, but yet still protect public safety. These applications are growing rapidly, and this is a sector that needs clear rules to foster commerce and to improve people's lives. That's why I introduced the PROTECT Act. It would codify the common sense idea that new technologies shouldn't be tied to old red tape. You may not realize this, but at present, the FDA relies on a 1976 legal definition of the term medical device. That's how they impose regulations on a host of new, low-risk technologies like software and mobile apps. In order for Americans to receive the maximum benefits from that increase in connectivity, there are two things I believe that government must avoid. First, policymakers cannot bury their heads in the sand and pretend that this technological revolution isn't happening, only to wake up years down the road and try to micromanage this fast-changing, dynamic industry. Number two, the federal government must also avoid regulation just for the sake of regulation. We need thoughtful, pragmatic responses, narrow solutions to any policy issue that may arise. For too long, the only strategy in Washington policy making is to react crisis to crisis to crisis. We need to dive into what this means for U.S. global competitiveness, for consumer welfare, for economic opportunity before the public policy challenges overwhelm us, before legislative and executive branches of government, or foreign governments for that matter, react without all the facts. Ultimately, businesses and consumers want certainty. People want to be able to invest in a product with some degree of confidence that the government won't stifle those opportunities that they're trying to create. Finally, I think it's entirely appropriate for the U.S. government to think about how to modernize its regulatory frameworks, consolidate, renovate, overhaul obsolete rules. We're destined to lose to the Chinese or others if the Internet of Things is governed in the United States by rules that predate our VCRs. There is no shortage of policy issues that deserve consideration. We all know that. The main ones obviously being privacy and security. But the question is whether we do it in a thoughtful way and in a way that weighs the costs and the benefits of increased connectivity for businesses, consumers, and the economy. Today's forum gives us the perfect opportunity to jumpstart this work. And I can say a bipartisan group, Senator Thune, Booker, Ayotte, Schatz, and I, we're looking forward, and we will continue to look forward to facilitating those discussions in the United States Senate. As we prepare to explore smart ways to help shape the Internet of Things, to realize its benefits, I welcome each of you to reach out to my office. I thank you again for this opportunity. I thank you for your interest in this very important issue, and I look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. I know we have more people coming in. Unfortunately, we don't have smart chairs, so you're going to have to manually move in towards the middle so we can fill in. I know there are some spaces, so if you have an empty seat next to you, if you wouldn't mind moving in or moving your bag, or if you have it on there, we do have people coming in. Next, we'll be hearing from Senator Kelly Ayotte. As a member of the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, Senator Ayotte is a strong supporter of ensuring that innovation on the internet can continue to thrive and provide solutions to people and businesses. The Senator has urged the Commerce Committee to hold a hearing early next year to explore the Internet of Things. Please join me in welcoming Senator Ayotte.
I want to thank Dan so much for the introduction. I really want to thank my colleague Deb Fisher for her excellent speech and for her leadership on these important issues that I think are going to either position us in the 21st century really to be the leader of innovation when it comes to the Internet of Things, or if we don't make the right decisions, is going to set us back in terms of our competitiveness with other countries. And I really appreciate her leadership in that regard, and I know later you're going to hear from my colleague Senator Schatz, who is also a very good leader on this issue and very strongly interested in making sure that we do the right thing in terms of American innovation. So I applaud you for having this discussion today, and as a member of the Commerce Committee, as Senator Fisher is as well, there is, I think, a tremendous opportunity for us as we look at the new Congress to examine the Internet of Things, and that's why I've asked for a hearing specifically on this topic, because so many of as you look at some of the regulations that impact different areas, or how some of the regulatory agencies are looking at specific issues, are very much outdated. And how we look at this going forward is going to be critical as to whether America remains a leader with regard to innovation. In the United States, the economic potential for the Internet of Things is so remarkable. And one thing I know as I think about how remarkable it is just my interaction with my children on this. I have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old, and the way that they immediately take to technology and use the technology, and frankly sometimes show me how to use the technology, I think is astounding. And as we look at the new devices coming online, as we look at some of the research estimates that there'll be 30 billion devices by 2020, and some have an estimate up to 37 billion intelligent things that will be connected and communicating by 2020. I know that's true, because this generation, they are ready to be connected, and they're actually thinking of new ways to connect. And what we need to do is ensure that as policymakers, that we continue to encourage that innovation, and we continue to encourage, which is a natural inclination of so many, not only in America, but around the world, that want to find new ways to help people solve problems by using technology, want to help us live better lives by using technology, and help us stay connected with each other in positive ways by using technology. As Senator Fisher mentioned, you think about the benefits and what we're seeing now, and this has happened so quickly. Whether it's wearable devices that track fitness and personal health, we're no longer walking around with the standard pedometers, but also smart thermostats at home, where you can change the temperature of your home and you don't even have to be there, and regulate what's happening at home. And in fact, New Hampshire, Texas Instruments actually manufactures chips that are used in the smart devices that regulate thermostats in our homes. And the reason I mention it is because I don't care what state you live in this country, as we look at the opportunity for economic growth and even driving the strength of manufacturing in our country, it really is very, very tied to the Internet of Things. And those jobs have become very different because the need to understand, of workers to understand how things interact together is a big part of this, and I think our opportunity for economic growth. We know that the Internet of Things can help businesses streamline process, boost productivity and efficiency, enhance data storage capacity. And just another example in New Hampshire, where I live in Nashua, New Hampshire, it's the southern part of our state. Dell operates a design center there, and I had a chance to visit that design center. And they're developing new solutions every single day to help companies reduce costs of storing and managing their data. But we can visit so many things that are happening in our country and companies where this is where our economy is going. And we as policymakers can either create an environment that allows that to continue to grow or one that thwarts that. To stay on the cutting edge, we need to make sure that our regulatory environment is conducive to fostering innovation. And I share the issues and concerns and the outline that Senator Fisher has talked to you about today. And I think there's an exciting opportunity as we look at the new Congress to take up some of these issues where we're living in the dark ages in the way that some of the regulations have been framed. Companies must be properly incentivized to invest in the future, and government shouldn't be a deterrent to innovation and job creation. So I'd like to share some words with you today from FTC Commissioner Maureen Olhausen, who I think summarized perfectly what our approach to regulating the Internet of Things should be when she said, "It is vital that policymakers approach new technologies with a dose of regulatory humility. By working hard to educate ourselves and others about the innovation, understand its effects on consumers and the marketplace, identify benefits and likely harms, and if harms do arise, consider whether existing laws and regulations are sufficient to address them before assuming that new rules are required." I find that a refreshing approach to hear from a regulator, and I couldn't agree more. If all regulators looked with some humility at how technology is used and whether we need to regulate and whether or not we need to regulate, I think innovation would stand to benefit. And I mean that from policymakers' perspective too. So I think the same can apply to us as members of Congress. Since the Internet is such a huge part of our lives, we must resist knee-jerk tendencies that sometimes someone sees a problem and they think that the immediate solution is that we need a whole regulatory framework without considering at all what the consequences of that framework will be. And some of them, as you know, some of the worst consequences of some of the regulations that come out of Washington were never intended in the first place. We just didn't even contemplate them. And that's why I think regulatory humility is very, very important. It's also important to note that the FTC already has the power under Section 5 of the FTC Act to go after unfair and deceptive practices. If we do anything from a regulatory approach, we must define the parameters of this authority so that the private sector understands what the rules are and give businesses the certainty that they need to innovate and thrive. So much of what I hear often from the private sector is that tell us what the rules are, and then we can decide how we're going to act. And it's the uncertainty that often comes from Washington that creates as much inaction as the actual regulatory framework itself. And technology continues to evolve so rapidly. There is no one-size-fits-all regulatory approach in this dynamic environment. And the best approach is to let that technology continue to evolve. What are we good at? Our country is filled with risk takers who have had the freedom to take chances and to come up with new ideas and to put their new ideas into application and then do wonderful things and create many jobs in this country, and also ways for us to communicate and ways to make people's lives better. A top-down preemptive approach is never the best policy, and I think will only serve to stifle innovation. We need to look at more public-private partnerships with industry. And in fact, as you look 20 years ago, with the internet still in its infancy, the Clinton administration's framework for global electronic commerce promoted these guiding principles. Quote, the private sector should lead, the internet should develop as a market-driven arena, not a regulated industry, and that government should encourage industry self-regulation and private sector leadership where possible. I think those words, given 20 years ago at the infancy of the internet, are today even more relevant as we look at the challenges and the issues that we need to face as regulators and policymakers. If legislation drives technology, the technology will be outdated almost instantly. And that is one of our challenges, and that's why humility is so important. Because we can put together a law, or an agency can put together a regulatory framework, and someone has already thought of a new device or a new technology that could remain outdated in terms of what we have legislated. And that's what we need to understand. If you think about it, imagine if Mark Zuckerberg had to ask permission before he invented Facebook. How different would our world be? Or we can identify any entrepreneur on any topic in this room and outside this room, and if they had to ask permission in advance to bring their idea forward, how can we expect that we will continue to innovate? As I look to the work of the Commerce Committee in the upcoming session, I think that this is going to be a very, very critical topic for our committee. Right now, there are a laundry list of agencies that are contemplating action on issues that are going to impact the Internet of Things. And let me just name a few. We know the FTC on privacy and security. We know the FDA on medical device apps. And frankly, the regulatory framework that often makes it difficult to bring new devices to market, where we've fallen behind Europe and other countries. The FCC on wireless issues, the FAA on commercial drones, the NHTSA on intelligent vehicle technology, the NTIA on multi-stakeholder privacy reviews, and that doesn't even touch on the state and local regulations and regulators and state lawmakers who often on a piecemeal approach are addressing these issues. And there is such potential for conflicting regulatory directives, and I think we have a responsibility in this committee to really look at the big picture and ensure that agencies aren't conflicting with each other, that what is being done makes sense and allows for future innovation that we can't even anticipate right now. We have challenges with not only how we regulate devices and how we regulate the issues in a way that allows innovation to thrive and grow. In my view, we need an approach that really focuses on ensuring that those new ideas can come forward versus a preemptive regulatory approach. But we also have serious questions about, once the data is all collected, how can it be used? And whether that's data breach, data security, and not only do I serve on the Commerce Committee, but I've had the privilege of serving on the Armed Services and Homeland Security Committees. And so as we look at issues like cyber legislation, how do we address those issues in a way that anticipates new technologies, that doesn't stifle innovation, yet still ensures that we're focusing on the protection of the country and also the privacy concerns that average citizens rightly have and that we respect in this country. So I'm honored to be here with all of you today. I think that as you look at the activity in the Commerce Committee, this is going to be on the forefront of some of the regulatory issues I've touched upon today. I know that Chairman Thune is very interested in this, and he's committed to me that we are going to have a hearing on the Internet of Things. So I look forward, as Senator Fisher said, to all of you, of hearing from you about your ideas about what we should be doing as policymakers, both on the tax end, the regulatory end, to drive innovation and to allow the entrepreneurs of the world and the new ideas that I know are coming from this new generation growing up to thrive rather than stifle ideas. So I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today, and I hope you have an excellent rest of the day.
Thank you again, Senator. We're going to go ahead and start our first panel, so I'd like to invite our panelists up here. Our first panel is going to be on smart homes and smart devices. As I think most people recognize, the Internet of Things has really taken off in the past year for consumer products. In fact, we might do a quick show of hands. Is there anyone in the room who doesn't have some kind of smart device that they either own or is in their home? Yeah, probably not. This is probably a selection bias as well. But you know, it's clearly taken off. A year ago, I don't think we would have had the same type of response. So the goal of this panel is to really understand and dig into the potential impact that this is having on consumers, on their homes, and how policymakers can really pave the way for this technology, both in terms of the regulatory options. And when Senator Ayotte was listing these agencies, it was very telling that when we think of who in government is influencing the Internet of Things right now, it's the regulatory agencies, much more so than the federal agencies that are helping deploy the technology, that are doing pilot projects, that are kind of making it actually happen. So we have an excellent set of panelists here today to discuss these issues. Starting on my left, Neil Chilson, who is an attorney advisor to Commissioner Olhausen with the FTC. Chris Irwin, who is with the Department of Energy. He's the Smart Grid Standards and Interoperability Coordinator. Then Vineet Shahani, who is Head of Commercial and Product Legal at Nest Labs, which is what I'm hoping for Christmas this year. And Ohad Zera, who's the Director of Global Product Management at Belkin. And if you aren't familiar with some of the great products at Belkin, they're really doing some of the most interesting work in some of the home automation space. So thanks to all of you for being out here today. So I just want to kick it off with a question that's really open to everyone. I'd like all of you to respond to this. And what are some of the immediate benefits that consumers should expect from the Internet of Things in the next few years? What are we looking at? And why don't we start?
Sure. Well, within the home, we see that there's several classes. The first, which is probably the most well-known, is around peace of mind, awareness of the environment in the home, understanding of what's going on to my family, what's going on with my property, and that remains a big one. More and more, we see the ability to really resolve the conflict that we all have between wanting to be comfortable but worrying about waste, not wanting to have things on when we're away but wanting to come into a nice environment. And then maybe last in the top of the pyramid of needs would be really about emotional and mood-altering benefits. How do I, something we've done since the cave days, make my domicile more comfortable and more like me?
And maybe you can talk about a few of the products and kind of where you see this going. I mean, I remember, actually it was a few years ago, we made the unfortunate mistake of going on vacation right before Thanksgiving. And so we came back and the power had gone out in the refrigerator. So we were welcomed with this nice smell of all of our frozen Thanksgiving meal gone completely. And this is a serious thing. I mean, it's the kind of thing where having sensors, this is what you know these types of things really know. So where are you seeing this kind of technology being deployed?
Yeah, I mean, there are many point solutions that could solve any example for anything that you want. For example, you could monitor the energy levels on your fridge and understand when something catastrophic has happened. The value and the promise of the Internet of Things is when the sensors that we have become so pervasive, or perhaps even more so when the infrastructure itself is a sensor as opposed to individual devices, where you, the user, don't have to predict what it is that you're looking for, but start getting proactive, maybe even anticipatory messaging about what could go wrong, or things that it could do for you just to improve day-to-day.
Any-
I think it was great what you just said about expecting a thermostat for Christmas, because I think 2 years ago, if somebody would have said that, people would have thought that was insane. But it's incredible. I mean, the Nest thermostat's a heavily gifted item. And I think it speaks to the level of engagement that Nest has created for people around issues like energy conservation and having access to information real time, to knowing how to run your house more efficiently. And so for us, I think the benefits to the customer are really customization. I think for a long time, there's been big home automation companies, right? And they serve very large, expensive packages to people. That's already out there. But really, it's for a very small set of public. Where companies like Nest come in is building pieces to the puzzle and taking on problems like energy conservation and the fact that people aren't saving energy enough, and approaching it with technology that has come about through smartphones and sensors, and taking that and bringing that to bear to the problem. And so I think that's, at Nest in particular, for us it's all about the customer journey and all about looking at the problem and coming at it with the technology that we know about.
Thanks. Chris, I know you've been working in this space for quite a while. I mean, what are the changes you're seeing?
Well, when I think about the customer benefits, especially from my perspective at the Department of Energy, it's actually the Internet of Things behind your Internet of Things that I start to think about a little bit, is that the energy infrastructure itself has been under-instrumented. It's really never needed that in order to maintain the safe, reliable power flow. But now, with communications and all the processing power that's out there, it really has started to pervade our energy infrastructure. And so there are sections of the country where when the power goes out, you get a text message. And so that refrigerator of food can now be consumed by your neighbors. And other wonderful things like that. So, we're really looking to see the consumer Internet of Things flourish, and to have the energy infrastructure be able to interact with that, so that customers can more accurately live their life the way they want. If they want to live more greener, then they need to have the information to know when green energy is being produced. Their things need to know that this is the time to consume energy if you need to do that, and things like that. So I think about sort of the Internet of Things behind the curtain that is serving up context and substance to all the devices that we're going to own.
And Neil, what are your thoughts on this?
And I might come at this a bit more as a consumer myself, less so from my position at the FTC. And by the way, really quickly, I speak today only for myself, not for anybody at the agency, not even my boss. So, what I see the Internet of Things bringing in the near future in the home is a self-discovery, a way to better understand how you live your life, and therefore be able to make changes that are useful. And I think that is something that I think that has a lot of appeal to me as a kind of a data wonk myself. But I think people like Nest and Belkin are working really hard to make it actionable to people who don't want to dig into the data, who just want a simple way to see, am I living a healthy life? How would I live a healthier life? How would I live a more green life? And I think that's the benefit that I see coming up very soon, and I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, we've certainly seen this kind of transformation over time. Kind of as you talked about, where now it's kind of cool to have a thermostat. It's kind of advanced. I mean, when you look at the evolution of technology, you have the early adopters who are kind of the nerds, right? I mean, it's kind of this kind of technologist. I went to a conference recently with Steve Wozniak was doing a talk, co-founder of Apple, the engineering side of it. And he's the kind of guy that had an iWatch that was basically just a computer strapped to his wrist, 20 years ago, because he didn't care what it looked like. He just wanted to have that technology there. But we're getting to the point where people are really trying to transform how people interact with technology, right? This is really, wearables are something that 10 years ago people would say, what are you talking about wearing a computer on your head? What are you talking about, having these devices on your clothing? But that's something that is increasingly more acceptable socially. So, my question for the whole panel is, how transformative will this technology be? Where will it really take us over the longer term?
Well, I think spot on your comments. People wouldn't have anticipated, and I still don't believe that anybody has ever woken up and said, I feel really disconnected from my house, and I'm going to go and get a connected home. We all have different things we're trying to solve, and we go out and look for solutions to those. And that may be taking a hacksaw to a piece of furniture, or maybe looking for technology to kind of fill that gap. I think of it kind of like my smartphone. When I got my first BlackBerry, I was just amazed at the capabilities of the fact that I could send email from anywhere. And I couldn't have possibly imagined at that point how many things I'd be actually relying on that smart device for now, 15 years later. And the same is really true for the Internet of Things. When we think about the potential, and we throw out numbers like the 30 billion or 37 billion, we're not talking about the same categories that we generally are. We're not just talking about thermostats or cameras or wearable devices. We really are talking about a pervasive connection of almost really anything that I could look at in this room.
I think when we're talking about data, there's obviously the data that's getting surfaced to people on their phone and telling them what the temperature is, what the history of heating and cooling in their house was, or what's the status of their smoke alarm. I'm obviously citing Nest products, but the other part of it that's really interesting, and I think what makes Nest different, is the machine learning aspect of it, right? The fact that we're using data to augment algorithms to take tasks away from people, obviously at their choice, that they don't want or can't do, right? So the genius of the Nest thermostat, in my opinion, is the fact that it learns, and the fact that it sets a schedule for you, and the fact that we didn't invent programmable thermostats, we didn't invent mobile devices being able to control the thermostat. Like I said, all that was there. What we've really been on the cutting edge of is creating machine learning behind it to take those tasks outside of people's need to do this, and optimizing in the house sort of the temperature and the heating and cooling usage and all of that for them. And I think the results are obviously, comes back to our original goal on building the product, which was to put a dent in energy usage and to make people more engaged in their in energy efficiency.
This is a tough one on my side in terms of what's going to happen. The one thing that we see is that as we use all of this technology and these devices and these applications to raise us up and sort of heighten the way we live and heighten our experience of the world and things like that, its absence is going to become all the more jarring. And so the loss of connectivity is going to be a disturbing force. The loss of energy, the loss of water. There's a few, some of the simple infrastructures, but also some of these higher order functions are going to become more critical. And so, in my mind, and especially thinking about energy, is that it's simply going to have to become an order of magnitude more reliable, because more of the world stops when it stops being available. And so we have to find new paths to deliver, whether it's connectivity or energy or anything else. If it's critical from second to second, it needs to be available second to second.
And when I think about how influential the Internet of Things, or how transformative it might be, I really have to answer, I think it's going to be big, and I don't really know. And I think this gets back to, I don't really know how. I think this gets back to Senator Ayat's and my boss's concept of regulatory humility. in a place that, in a kind of a network-based technological environment that changes so fast, it is very hard to predict what the benefits and what the uses are going to be. I don't think even Vint Cerf would have predicted how the internet would be used today. I don't like cat videos. I'm not sure he would have thought that was going to be a dominant use. But I think there is, so it's really hard to predict, and for us regulators, that makes our job hard in a lot of ways, but also it does advise caution to see how the market is solving things, and to really focus on where harms are actually occurring, and basically try not to get in the way of the great things that people are doing.
Why don't we stay on that point a little bit more, and maybe you can expand a little bit for anyone that's not familiar with some of the regulatory humility idea that's been put out there, especially as it relates to how it's can maybe be applied in this space. Are there areas where we can really say, is it that we say we just need to wait a long time because we're in such early stages with the Internet of Things? I mean, when we look at the life cycle of technology, and look how long the Internet took to really take off from its origins in the 60s to where we are today, right? We wouldn't have put regulations in the 60s for mobile Internet today. Are we still in these really early days? How long should we wait? What does that look like?
Well, I guess the question is, wait for what? There are some things that we certainly shouldn't wait to do. Where there are demonstrated harms to consumers, that's a place where if the FTC, for example, and I'll just use that, when they have the authority to act to protect consumers, they should do so. And we have a great example of that in the TrendNet case that we brought against a company that had IP-connected, basically home cameras that had very poor password security and stored and transmitted passwords in the clear. And hackers took advantage of that and posted pictures of people's kids, the insides of people's houses on the internet, and we brought a case against them. And I think that's very important. I think in this infancy of the IoT, because one of the overregulation isn't the only way we can stifle innovation or the development of this space. Losing consumers' trust is actually another way that we could slow adoption. And so I think the industry is really concerned about this, and I think regulators, where there is demonstrable harm, should act when they have the tools. And the FTC, as Senator Ayotte pointed out, does have some great tools to protect consumers in this space.
Yeah, I'd like to invite Benita Nohat to also kind of jump in on this, because it's it's an important issue. I mean, both of you are with companies that are very innovative. You're kind of in this emerging technology space. What's useful to you? I know you don't maybe spend your time thinking about how should I be regulated, but what is useful to you in terms of when you're designing security into your systems, when you're designing products that consumers want.
Certainly we look to use best practices, whether it's in security or how to deal with PII or any of these kinds of issues as we design our products. I love the example you gave of TrendNet, because that's true. A consumer gets burnt by an experience like that, and whether that's because a product just doesn't work or because their privacy is in breach in some ways, and will turn off from the industry for a long time. And then on the other hand, regulating this stuff this early is really, really difficult. The IoT is as horizontal as really any other of the big technologies that we've dealt with, including cloud and the internet as a whole, but yet reaches much further down because of its physical impact. And with Wemo, we're generally dealing with a relatively simple consumer product. But even those have implications into energy. They have implications into healthcare through kind of aging in place programs. There's a lot of places in that reaches, and how you really touch to that with regulation right now, that wasn't pinpoint, would be really difficult.
So, at Nest, and I've said it a few times, it really does come back to building great products and thinking about the customer journey. I will say that at Nest, we never use the words Internet of Things or smart home. I mean, I think these are kind of wonky words that that are necessary to kind of describe movement. But at Nest, I talk to sales and marketing and supply chain and engineering every hour, right? And really, their focus is entirely on building a great product, reacting to customers' reactions to those products real time. In social media, we literally know every complaint everywhere all the time, and we're monitoring it all the time. And that's what they've got their eye on the ball on. I think the reason there should be some, I think the industry should feel good about that focus is that I think there's an appreciation at Nest that keeping the user's trust and continuing to have the privilege to get into their house and be invited into their house and run devices that deal with very important data to people is not lost on people that work at Nest and people that develop and message the products. And so we know that if we break that trust, the business model doesn't work. We have to be transparent about the way that we're using data. We have to be clear with customers and give them sort of abilities to choose functionalities and integrations with other products. And I think so. It's hard to obviously answer your question. How would you want to be regulated? I mean, I can definitely tell you. I, as much as anybody at Nest, pays attention to the engagement that's going on and sort of the regulatory landscape. And I think it's all positive to have these discussions because it surfaces attention on doing the right thing. But I think not giving enough runway to let customers have input into how products are used and the utility that they're finding from it could lead to very blunt regulation on this and could stifle innovation as an unintended consequence. I think that was talked about by the senators in the statements, and I think there does needs to be that kind of runway given to product companies to get to a point where there's adoption. Because as you said earlier, we've kind of done well with the techie kind of early adopter community. We're entering the mass market now. We have to we have to get to people that really aren't thinking about connected devices all the time. And we have to educate them on what these things are about. And we need to have the latitude to do that.
Great. Did you want to add anything, Chris? Okay. I want to move on to the issue of consumer data. And in a lot of these areas, again, if you kind of look at the trend, I mean, you came from this, there was the original quantified self movement, which was all about taking as much data about the individual and using it to improve your life. But we're kind of moving out of that space, and but there are still a lot of people that want access to their data. They want to maybe share their data with a third party or eventually use a service. When you look at what we've seen with smart meters and the Green Button Initiative, a lot of that innovation came from freeing the data. What should we be doing in this space to make sure that with wearables and connected devices, consumers can ultimately access the data? And Chris, why don't we start with you on that?
Yeah, I'll start off on that one. When Anish Chopra became the first Chief Technology Officer of the United States, he had a mission in healthcare and in energy about data liberation, and so the government did not have any personal energy data. This was a partnership with private industries to get that data moving, get that data into a format that can be used by the Internet of Things and used by people in their daily lives. There have been a few classes of innovators and partners that we've had on the initiative, and I'm very glad that we have them. 40 million customer homes and businesses have access to their energy consumption data in the same format, all thanks to the utilities and the energy service companies. We just brought the color and the shape, and they did all the work, so it was really quite beautiful. But the thing is that there are partners who believe that once they receive the data, then that's fantastic. We're glad it was open, and now it is no longer open. I think that a characteristic that should be inherited by everybody who participates in the Internet of Things is data liberation. If that data lands at Nest, that data needs to be available from Nest to the customer, and ideally to the remainder of the third parties that are out there. It's one of those things where people believe they can capture customers by capturing their data and holding it hostage. Google has kind of relinquished that with their Google Takeout program, is that they have a universal program across everything. That is, if you want to take your data home, you can take it. But that is a key characteristic that I see championing within government and within the private sector, is that the data is not meant to be held captive in order to preserve a customer relationship.
Yeah, good leader.
Yeah, I think consumers should always have a right to their own data. So I completely agree with that. And when we talk about these smarter algorithms that a Nest or we would use to determine behavior, the more variety and breadth of data, the more value it has, right? Silo data is worth significantly less than data that can be mashed up and correlated with other sources. At the same time, I would urge caution to also not stifle innovation in the broad arrays of companies out there that are also developing new ways of data capture, new sensors, stuff like that. So we probably want them to also see a path to growth and to innovation.
Yeah, and I would just say, I think the idea of transportable data between different companies is a really interesting question. I think economists might be able to chip in on when that's productive and when it's not. There is some concerns if you mandated the release of data, because that adds a whole other layer of security that every company has to go through to validate that the person that they're releasing the data to is actually the correct person. And so I think there are some challenges there with that. We don't let everybody see every single piece of credit information, or you can see your credit report, which is sort of the end result, and you can see some of the things that went in, but you don't see everything that might go into that. And I think there's some good reasons for keeping some of the proprietary calculated information. I think economists could say that actually can drive some innovation as well.
So I want to stay on energy for a moment. And Chris, I mean, when we look at, there's all these different verticals, right? I mean, you have energy, you have healthcare, you have home automation, and certainly energy, in many senses, is ahead of the game in this area in terms of, the investment that's been made in smart meters, the investment that's been made in the smart grid infrastructure. Are there lessons that you think other industries can learn? And I mean, the Department of Energy has been just such a leader in helping make this happen. If HUD wants to be the leader in getting smart homes, what should they be? Are they already knocking on your door asking for that?
Oh well, yeah, but I think that to say we're ahead of the game is a very small advantage. We have an interesting setup, is that there are about 140 to 150 million electricity meters throughout the United States. And with some work from the Recovery Act as well as private investment, there are about 60 million that are automated, that actually gain energy data on a regular basis, that can then be used within the utility enterprise to bill for the energy, but also then, really at this point, shared with the customer, and the customer governs the access to their data at that point. I think that we've picked up a lot of things really from the collaboration with the White House and the private sector on making sure that the standards are there in the first place. It's all well and good to release the data, but if it isn't in a format that can be absorbed by customers or by their devices, it becomes an issue. Another challenge is that it's sort of like peeling the onion, and so with the Green Button Initiative, we've released the first level of data about the energy infrastructure, which is what is touching the customers and measuring their energy use. But there is so much more data available that is not ready for release. We haven't gone through the diligence of looking at what is the next green button? Is kind of a question that goes through the energy industry, is what is the next data that ought to be shared responsibly within a community to make it more efficient, more responsive, more customer oriented. And so that's the thing, is as soon as you get your first victory, what's the next victory? how can that infrastructure be made more transparent for its own purposes?
I think it's a really important point because when we look at, we do a lot of work on open data at the center, and we're always talking about this need for the feedback loop between the developers, the users of the data, and the producers of the data, because there's always new formats they want, better quality, some verifiability. You look at energy data, for example, on homes. I mean, right now, you can't really, when you're shopping for homes on Zillow, you don't see an energy score. You don't see a really good energy score that is, if this home maybe costs more, but I'm going to be paying more in energy costs or less in energy costs. But you have to have verifiable data to do something like that. You can't just maybe trust a third party. So is there a mechanism that you think has worked so far in that kind of feedback loop? And I'll open this up to the rest of the panel as well, because you're working in these spaces. What are you hearing from your customers about what they want next?
I'll start with, we actually had a couple of apps for energy competitions, and there was an app developer here in DC. They developed an app called Black Sheep that actually fused voluntarily provided green button data with Zillow. And so you could actually get the energy context, the energy usage and costs blended with that data. But really, the one thing we know for sure is that the answers aren't going to come from us. We could do maybe perhaps a nuclear power plant for you or something like that. But the innovation comes from the community, and really engaging entrepreneurs and innovators is going to be key.
Yeah, a few words on energy. I mean, obviously, energy services are really big for Nest because we have thermostats out there, but the continuing vision, obviously, is to continue to engage customers through programs where we're actually collaborating with utilities to run what's called demand response programs, where we, with the customer's consent, get to adjust the set points of temperature, and obviously during peak times of usage, there's a tremendous opportunity to save money for the customer, for the utility, obviously just for the environment generally. But there's hurdles to that, right? We talked about things that could get in the way, right? There's obviously overregulation. There's also just, much of the country is covered with regulated utilities. And so getting access to regulated dollars and ratepayer dollars and green dollars is a tall order in a lot of cases.
Generate a profit.
Right. And that whole process, is something that, if you want to keep pace with where the product companies are and the visions that they have to deliver these things that customers very much want, you have to take another look at those processes. And frankly, you have competing things like, utilities putting in smart meters, which in a way, when you have third parties like Nest that are sort of doing similar things, how do those work together? And if I abstract this a little bit more, at Nest we have a Works with Nest program, which personally to me is one of the most exciting things that we're doing. It's a recognition that we're not going to build everything. Like we're not going to make, washers and dryers and just things that are being done either really well or they're just not where we are investing time. So we're going to collaborate with them. And today the platform is an API program that runs through the cloud. But I've been working with developers and there's obviously a chasm that we're crossing now, right? Where you have car companies and appliance companies and people that aren't as used to being connected coming into our program and dealing with some of the issues that you talked about, right? The idea that this customer data is our data, right? I mean, this is our customer, right? And obviously our view is more along the lines of it's the customer's data and it's the customer's choice to make a decision in how they want to do things. Obviously, the responsibility on a company like Nest is that we keep it secure and that we be transparent with the customer about what they're doing and what their choices are. But I think as with energy and all these other industries, you're gonna come up against these reservations, and I think that's again a reason to have time to let this market evolve.
We talk a lot about data, but aside from the data wonks out there, most people really don't want data. They want actionable insights, things they can actually do to affect change. And I've seen studies that you show somebody kind of in a live way their energy usage, and a household can save up to, 10% of total consumption. But that if you actually show them really a line item list of where that energy going at a live level, I mean, that could be up to north of 30% because there's really actionable results we can take. That's the kind of paths that we're taking with WeMo, looking how we can build sensors that either through the water or through the internal home grid through one place really see distributed load across all the client's devices, providing that real feedback in a way that's very actionable.
No, I think that's a great point. Ultimately, when we talk about data, we're always talking about smarter decisions, both smart decision making through being more informed, through better analysis, or through automation, where you say, like with Nest, I want to have the most energy efficiency. That's my setting. Optimize for that, or optimize for I want to always be 78 degrees in my home or something like that. So I think that's a great point. We're going to open it up to audience questions. If you have a question, you can just raise your hand and we'll bring a mic to you. We'll start over here. Well, we'll start over there then, and then we'll come back over here. Yeah. Do we have the AV folks back there?
Yep.
There we go.
Hi, I had a quick question for Vineet and others. I read with interest a white paper that Nest did. It was about the Nest Protect CO white paper about the aggregate. It was the data that was collected about the Nest Protect CO monitoring, and it was very interesting. It was the white paper reported on sort of the CO monitoring that it collected, and the interesting insights that was that it learned sort of in the aggregate. What I found interesting about it was how the white paper reported sort of in the aggregate, not about individual, not just individual incidents, but the insights about the aggregate usage of the aggregate insights that we'll learn. So wanted to see, if you could speak to that experience about what Nest learned from creating that report, and maybe if anybody else wants to speak to that as well.
Sure, yeah. If you go back to the problem again, right, when you're thinking about the smoke alarm, it was that people need to know more about their own safety in their house. And the CO example, I think, is one of the best ones that we've seen come in. We've had a number of stories come in on an individual level of houses that installed it and then, had an alarm immediately go off around CO. It's this, and in the aggregate, now that we've got thousands of these devices out, we have aggregate information on just sort of CO levels as they exist out there. And in some cases, not even sort of rising to the level of an alarm, but the way we've been able to inform the public, I think, has really been a benefit to public safety. We actually, a couple months ago, we had a New York Times ad that basically was just 2 blank pieces of paper as you're flipping through the New York Times, and it just had an S logo and said, the Nest Protect sees what you can't see. It's CO, and it's been this incredible, I think, example of how data and connected products and this level of information can serve up a real benefit to society. And obviously, as we're developing these white papers, we're obviously, we have a very strong policy for privacy and data, and we're true to that. We're obviously reporting this data in a way that we think is consistent with that and is going to help people.
Okay, yes, it does seem to be working. So home automation and...
You can, I'll go for it. If you can identify yourself.
Oh, sure, Paul Schrader with the American Foundation for the Blind. So home automation, mobile health access, these things are going to be, and already proving to be, huge for people with limitations, disabilities, aging, temporary disabilities. Completely changing the game. I actually do wake up wondering why I can't connect better to my house, honestly, because I've got a lot of old, thermostat technologies and things of that sort. So my question to you is, how maybe this is partly a question about regulatory humility. How do we actually ensure that this group, who really does stand to benefit a lot more, let's say, than the Mercedes user whose Nest Control can turn the house up when they get close to home. It's a fine thing, but I think we might be able to argue that somebody with a disability has perhaps a higher need to ensure access to these devices. How are we going to do that in the regulatory environment that we're sort of walking into at the component level, at the user interface level, at the system level? And then I guess the second question would be how to stimulate secure, reliable data application, meaning at the product level. In other words, if we've got products with data printed replacing barcodes, we've got a much better way of accessing information at the product level. But of course, that would also have to come with really good filtering systems so you're not overloaded.
I'll start out. Just one of the things that I've seen is the people who produce the best products know their customer the best. And one thing that is slowly starting to emerge in some advocacy organizations is innovation advocacy and technology advocacy in service to your constituency. And so, it's all well and good for the Department of Energy to have an Apps for Energy contest, which is very open-ended. We can't say don't innovate here. It's a wide open innovation platform. What I'm looking for actually is the reciprocal. I would like to partner with AARP and have an Energy Apps for Seniors competition. I'd like to partner with other organizations like yours where you bring an intimate knowledge of your constituency to us, and then it becomes sort of a shared space. I'm sure there's some other responses up here, but that's one of the things that I'm kind of really looking forward to.
Take the question.
Hi, Eric Fisher with the Library of Congress. I'm wondering, later there's a panel on industry, and I'm wondering what lessons you all have taken from or think should be taken for the kind of work you all do from industrial control system experience. Security is one thing that comes to mind, but maybe other things as well.
You got it? I totally got this.
I know, I can't say I can speak to industrial that well.
I'll start, and it's, in general, we are crowdsourcing more problems. Doing it in the social media, we're doing it in industry, we're doing it in industrial settings. And so when you look at the Internet of Things meets industrial controls or meets grid controls, is that we're actually farming out the solutions to more things and having that information come back. It makes us do a few things differently. You have to secure more assets. You have to have more security. You have to be a little bit more nimble, is that you have to get a lot of information from a lot of different sensor points, and it's not like your grandfather's control system where you get to trust everything that comes back to you. And that's a really fascinating thing for me, is that you're crowdsourcing your control problem. All these sensor points are coming back. You don't trust everything. You can still obtain tremendous advances in control and efficiency. But that is one of the neat twists that comes back, is that it's less about trust than it used to be in a hardwired world.
I'll say the devices that we've chosen to make going into the house is incredibly complicated, and it actually gets even more complicated when you get into industrial use and businesses. The interesting thing about the thermostat, for example, is it's not really a science, it's more of a trade. And if you think about the numbers of different variations and compatibilities that you need to be able to have a device talk to your HVAC system, and how that varies not just in the US, but we've recently launched in several countries in Europe, it's massively complex. And the engineering time and the customization that it takes to get that right takes a tremendous amount of investment. And so, in my prior working, I worked a lot on smartphones, and that's very hard and that's very regulated, but in a lot of ways, you've got GSM, you've got CDMA, you've got a few variations in China and Japan. But basically, the cellular networks are somewhat standardized. I think the products that we're attacking are fragmented. And so to move to industrial and really optimize that is going to take a lot of investment.
Other questions?
One thing I'll add on to that is that there's, we have a lot of old utility personnel. We have a retirement issue in the energy industry. People are talking about it. We're all very disturbed. We have education initiatives and things like that. There's a lot of bemoaning is how do we solve this brain drain, and how do we get these awesome people that our universities and two-year colleges are producing and get them interested in energy. And one of the realizations we've come to is don't make people specialize in energy, make energy look more like the rest of the world. And that sort of comes into, industrial controls are a special solution set. They're a special set of problems that you try to solve, and it's a specialization and all that kind of stuff. If we move energy, if we move water, or if we move some of these things closer to an IT interpretation, closer to the solution set that people are learning today, just to program something they do at fun, for fun with Lego, we're going to get those employees that we need. And so that's some of the things that we're thinking about in industrial controls or in energy, is make our systems look more like the rest of the world from an IT perspective. And that's going to be one of the keys to solving our problem, not making energy experts.
Great. Yeah.
Can I jump back to the question from the gentleman from AFB? Did I get that right? Your question is fascinating, and my Commissioner Oldhausen gave a speech last year called An Internet of Inclusion. We talked about having more things and more people on the internet, and I think there is a lot of promise with this technology to bring in groups that, to bring services to groups that have not been able to get them in the past. She spoke mostly in that speech about bringing, city-level medicine and expertise to rural areas as one thing that the Internet of Things can do. To address your question about how do we get there from a regulatory perspective, those sorts of niche markets are very challenging to make a business case for sometimes, but they're especially challenging if you add on compliance costs on the top that make it very hard for those companies to be profitable. And so I think there is a strong market demand for some of these niche markets, and the promise of the Internet of Things is that it is so customizable, and it's trying to reach each consumer, kind of make their life the way they want it. So I have a lot of hope for that. And I fear adding regulatory compliance costs on top makes it harder to reach the sort of small niche markets. And so I'd love to talk to you more about that.
I'll also mention we have a report that we released in September called The Rise of the Data Divide. And in this paper, we talk about the fact that we've had traditionally the digital divide, but with the emergence of these new data-producing technologies, we'll likely see a data divide as well. And we should be starting to think now about how you might have disparate impacts on different communities and what we can do to close those gaps through the various reasons that they may exist. So I have one last question for the panel, and it really, it gets to the heart of this. As we've talked throughout, there's so many opportunities here for, what can ultimately be not just consumer convenience, but life-saving technology, whether it's, improvements in fitness and health, whether it's, the kind of remote patient monitoring, healthcare type wearables, or even the CO2 examples, public safety, personal safety examples. It seems clear that there's this, pressing, life-saving need for some of this technology. So delays actually impact, real people's lives. So with that in mind, are there things that policymakers should be doing to incentivize more of this technology?
Great question. The question is, when I think about it, I think incentivize from the FTC's perspective, as a enforcement and antitrust agency, consumer protection and antitrust agency mostly, we don't manage a lot of big programs that might provide funds to do sort of infrastructure investment. But I think there are things that the FTC is trying to do to spur or to continue the innovation in this space. And one of them is its convening function, getting people together in events somewhat like this, actually, but with a sort of with a government perspective, kind of organizing it. To talk about the key issues and to try to, and then the agency tries to digest that and boil it down into principles and how new technologies, how we can apply the previous, the long-lasting rules of the FTC to these new technologies, the Section 5 deceptive and unfair practices, the FIPS, and how well those fit or don't fit. So I think that sort of high-level policy work is important. It's not really incentives so much. It's not incentivizing, but I think that it is helping build the sort of knowledge framework that is important for businesses and consumers and regulators to understand if we're going to make this reach its full capacity, its full potential.
Yeah.
If I could share a bit of a roundabout anecdote about this, but in some ways, I'm here today and representing WeMo because we were incentivized to be in the space. It was actually through the DOE. And so a lot of the people with the skill sets around these kinds of technologies, many of the startups and the teams in place today got there because of smart grid rollouts, and even though perhaps the kind of the final 100 meters into the consumer, into the home, didn't materialize, they were pursuing kind of that dream, and they're pursuing those real hard dollar incentives, and then pivoted to provide it to consumers in other ways, but still getting to some of the same benefits of efficiency. So perhaps the thought really should be about what's kind of that next horizon that we could be thinking about. And I would want to think about a lot of it towards the use of data and how we can do more general research into that area.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Just briefly, because I know we're basically out of time. I think that the debate is healthy, and obviously, with the fact that, at least from Nest's perspective, when we think about the customer a lot, it's great to hear how many times that was mentioned, and if that continues to be the foundation of the debate, I think it's a great debate. And then in terms of, it comes back to maybe more not knowing what you can do to help it, but I know there's things that we've experienced as we try to break down these barriers of connecting older industries and getting adoption on issues that have often in the past been challenging for people to get fired up about. And that's, I think being cautious of blunt regulation and blunt enforcement, and then reducing some of these barriers like we talked about with regulated dollars and things to try to make that easier for us to proliferate products and services.
I'll take a quick second to last word. I think that probably one of the things that we need to do is we actually have an open data policy that came from the president a couple of years ago. We're looking to execute on that. We're looking to make all of the treasure trove of data resources across the federal government, but for us, we have so much information about energy that we have, it's an underutilized resource because it's not sufficiently shared. And so really, that open data policy is something that's still grinding through the gears right now. And we want to see how all of the data that we've created in the public trust can be used as rocket fuel for additional innovation. And I'm super glad we didn't talk about smart onesies.
Fortunately, we missed that one. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining us on this panel. We're going to transition straight into our second panel on smart cities and infrastructure. So please join me in thanking this group. to move straight into the second panel, so I'm going to invite our second panel up here momentarily. Thank you. Started as our panel is getting up here. Our second panel is going to be on smart cities and smart infrastructure. And it's really all around how, the Internet of Things, we've talked about how consumer devices are transforming consumer experiences. And we want to move into a discussion about how smart connected devices are transforming communities and transforming society at large, how it's being integrated into city infrastructure, into roads and bridges, and what the implications of this will be. If you look at one of the reports that we have out there on the Internet of Things, one of the interesting applications that we saw was on college campuses, where college campuses have deployed smart trash cans. And this is something that at first you would think, why are you having smart trash cans? Right? And it turned out that it was a college in Boston, I think it was Boston University, they deployed these smart trash cans. They were solar powered, and they were able to decrease collection from about 12 times a week to 2.5 times a week. It was a dramatic decline. They were able to optimize routes, optimize delivery, based on just having more information from these connected devices. So it was saving substantial money. And there's lots of opportunities like this. So we have a great set of panelists here today to talk about these issues. Starting on my left, we have Hillary Kane, who's Director of Technology and Innovation Policy at Toyota. Dan Hoffman, who's the Chief Innovation Officer with Montgomery County, Maryland. Tanetta Obari, excuse me, who's the Business Development and Strategy Manager with Verizon, and Alan Roth, who's Senior Executive Vice President with US Telecom. So thank you all for being here today. I want to start off with, kind of a simple question for everyone. What do you see as life like in a smart city? What do you see as the future here? Hillary, let me start with you. And really we're talking about transforming communities. And Toyota is at the forefront of this when we talk about intelligent vehicles.
So the sort of smart city of the future, I think it's going to have a few characteristics. First, we're going to see fewer car accidents, right? So we're going to be coupling sort of emerging vehicle to vehicle and vehicle to infrastructure communication. We're going to couple that with automated driving technology, and we are going to reduce, if not eliminate altogether, traffic accidents. We are going to have less traffic congestion, right? So part of that's caused by eliminating traffic accidents, right? Because that tends to lead to backup. But also we're going to have better information about real-time traffic conditions and the ability to navigate you from point A to point B more efficiently. I think we're also going to see new, yet fully envisioned forms of smart urban mobility. We're going to see like three-wheeled cars and electric-powered bicycles, and we're going to see those new urban mobility forms coupled with or integrated with other forms of mobility, so that you're looking at sort of multimodal navigation rather than single-mode navigation. I think so those are some of the things I think we can look forward to on the transportation side.
Thank you. Dan, you're already kind of on the cusp of some of this, but some of your projects.
Thank you. Our initial thrust into this, the IoT genre, really focuses on one of the concepts that came up towards the end of the last panel. That is, IoT for everyone. How do you make an environment where it's not just those that can go out and buy the expensive smart home, but how can you provide services? How can you deliver emergency response services, health services to those who are aging in place, to people with disabilities, to any vulnerable population? So we've already started forming partnerships with senior living facilities, low-income housing complexes, affordable housing complexes, to start identifying devices and strategies that really allow us to remove the barriers to entry for an individual who might want some type of connected device to further their own safety and security. And that means trying to find devices that may or may not rely on Wi-Fi, trying to remove other costs that might be like monitoring services. Whatever we can do to lower that barrier to entry for someone, and then how do we connect and get that information back to us? And a lot of the devices we see now the person has that information and they might be able to share it with a person, but how do they open that up in a safe, secure way so that when there is an event that requires some type of response, that first responders know about it so that they can go respond to it. It's nice to know that there's something, it's nice to know that something is happening in your home that might threaten your safety, but it's a lot better to have someone else know also that you're in danger so that they can respond to it. So that's our initial push into IoT.
Thank you. Tanetta, what's your vision for the connected city?
Well, connected city to me, I want to piggyback off something that was said earlier in the first panel, is that as I did research in this, I looked at who this is going to help. So when you look at the constituents, the consumer driven, so if you look at this as a business, if you look at this as a city, if you say the counties, the states, or even the universities, what's the requirement there? And then looking at it globally. So what I see it is primarily, it is the Internet of Things scope to municipalities in those different areas, but also what their needs are. And the needs really, this is a global economic play. And a smart city is a city that is going to be attractive to industries because that city has that infrastructure, that digital infrastructure to bring new jobs, spur innovation, have university grads do startups, because most of your jobs start from the smaller companies. So a smart city is going to be safe, it's going to have increased jobs, it's going to have increased innovation, and it's going to make smarter use of resources through efficiencies. And it's also going to be great for the environment. So when you look at it that way, it fits so many different verticals, but the main thing is how does it help that citizen? And you'll start to begin to see a competition of the cities that have these things are the cities that are more attractive to businesses and industries.
Thank you. Alan?
I'm going to take off my U.S. Telecom hat for a moment and say, as a resident of Adams Morgan, I envision a sensor on every rat hole, counting the number of rats that exit so that we can call the Department of Public Works very quickly and the Department of Health very quickly and have them come take care of our problems. In fact, among the various, you mentioned, for example, trash removal. I mean, among the various public goods that can be dealt with by, through the use of smart city applications, public health and the delivery of those kinds of public services, public sanitation and so forth, are among those things. But putting that U.S. Telecom hat back on, I would say this, the conversation we've had thus far has really focused primarily on smart cities being thought of primarily through the use of wireless technology and delivering those services through the use of sensors and processors using primarily wireless technologies. But in any decent-sized city, in any large metropolitan area, certainly, this isn't going to be possible without the use of a robust fiber backhaul infrastructure and supporting all of the sensors and supporting all of that, all those wireless communications devices, not to mention data centers and operation centers to handle all of that information, is going to require rethinking how we deal with pole attachments, how we deal with conduits, how we deal with rights-of-way, how we deal with permitting, how we deal with land use, and from the standpoint of smart cities operating their government operations smartly in those respects. I think there's a lot of rethinking that needs to be done in terms of handling those things efficiently. And private sector side needs to interface with the government side in order to be able to roll out those services efficiently.
You know, you joked about the rats, but if you look at Chicago, Chicago deployed this, what they call array of things. And it's this pilot project to put basically sensors, as many sensors as they can throughout the city on lampposts. And they're just trying to collect as much data as they can. They want to release it publicly, and they're doing this. And one of the applications is actually to go and they've started to use it to identify where they need pest control. And it's these are real problems. So it's good you bring that up. The next question I have for you is, it really gets to that question of data. With so much more data available to city leaders and to the public, what should they be collecting? What should they be going after? How should they be trying to use data? And so, why don't we start with you, Dan, since you're kind of in the thick of this.
The Chicago example is one that I'm familiar with, and it's a great example. They lead the way on it, where and it demonstrates a commitment to getting as many sensors out there, as many connected devices out there, so that they can gather data, use it for decision making, everything from traffic decisions to pest control. But that can only go so far, and this is where industry plays, I think, an important role, is that the government, the county, city, state, we can't deploy enough sensors to really move the needle and make a difference. Otherwise, we're going to be managing an immense network of sensors that will not be sustainable. We will have to rely on the private sector to feed data to us, whether it's a real estate developer that's building a smart building and they hire a company to outfit that building with sensors. We'll never see that data unless we have a partnership, unless there's an infrastructure, unless there are protocols in place that allow us to get that data. So if I want, for example, my first responders to have access to the temperatures, the occupancies, movement, whatever it might be that you can get out of a smart building while they're en route to that building, I have to have a way to get that data safely and securely. I'm not going to deploy those sensors necessarily. That's going to be baked into the infrastructure by the person that built that building. It's going to be managed by the building managers. But I need some type of open platform, like the internet. I need some type of open platform that I can build applications off of. That I can get access to the appropriate data when I need it, so that I can get it to the folks that need it when they're on the way to that fire. Otherwise, it'll always be piecemeal. Otherwise, it'll always just be a building here, a building there. Because although we provide housing, we invest in affordable housing, that's a fraction of a percent of all of the housing, all of the residences in Montgomery County. So I'm looking more at ways to, how do I unlock what will be more and more data over time, as opposed to how do I deploy my own sensors in some cases.
Hillary, maybe you can jump in here. Obviously Toyota is a company that's kind of experimenting on the edge, especially on the public safety side of taking data from the consumer and sharing that maybe with emergency responders, or trying to get first responders to the scene faster. What are some lessons that we can take from that?
Yeah, and I think that's right. I think where we have a lot of opportunity in the transportation space in terms of interaction and collaboration and sharing with government is in sort of the public safety realm. We already have capabilities in vehicles now where if the consumer wants the information shared and they're in an accident and an airbag deploys, we can contact emergency personnel and share information about the accident and the occupants and things like that, so that there can be a better response. I think there's absolutely also opportunity in terms of real-time traffic information and information about choke points at specific times that can help with sort of rejiggering of roadways and build out of a new infrastructure to address those choke points. There's also the capability of vehicles to communicate information about road conditions, not traffic conditions, but like a pothole, right? The cars are the first ones that are going to discover there's a pothole, and if that information could be then transmitted sort of in real time to the folks responsible for filling those potholes, that could be useful. I do think one place where where it's not about the vehicle sharing the information with city planners and those sort of folks, but The other way is when it comes to roadside infrastructure that's going to be needed to support the vehicle-to-infrastructure communication system. That's going to require sensors on things like, traffic signals and light posts and things that the private sector, isn't responsible for. And so there's going to have to be some collaboration on those pieces to make this network work.
And maybe you can stay on that point for just a minute
Yeah.
and talk about how we are seeing the deployment of some of that infrastructure, that it's not something that is completely top down, right? I mean, these are a lot of times, individual cities are having to make these decisions.
Right.
So how do we create a national infrastructure when you have all of these
Right.
mayors and municipalities making these decisions?
It's a real challenge, and I can tell you, this is one place earlier the senators were talking about U.S. competitiveness. I can tell you that the U.S. is behind other countries in the world in terms of the development and deployment of intelligent infrastructure, this infrastructure that's going to support vehicle-to-infrastructure communication. And we at Toyota know it quite well because we can contrast what's going on here in the United States with what's going on in Japan, where there has been a very strong commitment on behalf of the government to deploy this infrastructure. So I'll give you just a quick example of how this plays out. When you deploy a connected car, I'm talking connected car in terms of this ability to communicate with other cars and with infrastructure. From a marketing standpoint, a commercialization standpoint, it makes sense to have vehicle-to-infrastructure communication first. Just think about it. You are an early adopter of this technology. You drive your new Toyota off the lot, and there are very few other cars out there that have this capability. So you're not talking to very many other cars, right? If there's infrastructure out there, you're immediately getting a benefit in terms of your exchange of information with the infrastructure around you. So that's what we've done in Japan. We deployed vehicle-to-infrastructure communication technology in Japan in 2009. We haven't been able to deploy it in the United States because there just isn't any infrastructure for the vehicles to be communicating with. But we do have a problem different than Japan, which is that we've got this sort of localized responsibility for infrastructure. We're seeing a build-out of infrastructure in Michigan right now, and it's a collaboration between the U.S. Department of Transportation and the Michigan Department of Transportation and the University of Michigan. So, and I think we're going to have to see more of those sorts of pilot programs that are joint federal and local efforts, build out a number more of these pilot cities or pilot regions, show consumers the benefit, show city officials the benefit of this type of infrastructure, and then hopefully spur further development of it.
Heather, do you want to jump in on this question?
You asking me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Well, I just think that cities, what I found out, have quite a bit of data. They're just not making adequate use of that data. There's a lot of data that's in silos within different departments. So I don't think it has to be a total overhaul, but taking use of the current data that you have in place, that might be in different databases, that might be in 16 different databases doing a different thing, and having efficiencies built around that, and then taking the data from sensors where there's needed. So putting that information together to bring insight is where we're going to be able to make use. And being from Chicago myself, I can tell you the Array of Things project is more about urban sensing to see where there are heat spots within a city, or looking at the environmental monitoring, or understanding where there might be pockets of influenza. And one thing that's great about this is that they are letting researchers, and this is a consortium of universities, to actually go in and students be able to work and make models from it from around the different universities in the United States. And when it comes to the rat problem, and you had mentioned it making national, I think, I want to give credit to the CIO of the city of Chicago, Brenna Berman, who was behind that, because of the fact that when I look at this country, yes, you're correct, we are behind when it comes to smart cities, but one thing, you look at the Barcelonas, you look at the Singapores, and I actually been out to Seoul, Korea a couple of years ago, okay? But one thing that we are ahead in is technology. And we have always been an innovative country. And what we need to do is continue to spur that innovation and use it correctly. So, but find the problem. There's a different problem in the Midwest or in the Rust Belt areas and you would see energy might be a problem more in California, or water resource. So find the problem and just start with a small data set. And that's example when I say the rats. When it came to the rats, they had data that showed that there were birds. They would get reports in 311 system that there was a lot of birds, dead birds. And there was having that data with the data of where the rat populations were, they just understood that there was always a huge rat population wherever there was this dead bird, reporting. So they sat down and spoke about it and said, can we try this out between these two departments? And what they did was put poison down in one area, but knowing that those populations then migrate, you kill a few and then they migrate, but taking historical data to say where they migrate to, put the poison there, and then the 3 other locations, I believe they brought the population down about 70%. So that's what we're saying, using data for actionable insight, using predictive analytics so you know ahead of time. So you're making efficient use of the resources and just using that one model, solving that one problem, you get buy-in to then collaborate with different departments to work on other problems.
Right. And that's a great example, and thank you for the detail, because it really illustrates that need to work across departments. We talk about cities, but these are cities with lots of different agents, lots of different stakeholders, and most of these problems involve bringing people together. Or to Dan's point, even if you're installing sensors, they might be city sensors, but they might be city sensors of this department and city sensors of that department. How do you bring all that together? Alan, I want to go back to you. I mean, you've obviously seen some of the challenges probably working with municipalities and deploying national infrastructure. So we're talking about the Internet of Things and these other types of devices. How do we roll this out? How do we work effectively with cities?
Well, in the nature of the federal system that we have, I don't know necessarily that it's feasible to have, quote unquote, a national strategy that imposes a one-size-fits-all system on every city in the country. For starters, I don't think it works. Having worked some myself personally in DC, I know for a fact that local communities want local input. They want engagement at the local level with how things are going to work, and I don't necessarily believe that having the federal government tell them how it's going to be is going to be a particularly effective way for either the private sector or the federal government to engage at the local level.
Can I ask you before you go? Do you think there's a difference between there's certainly a difference between maybe a top-down federal operational strategy versus something like the broadband strategy or other kind of aspirational strategies? Yeah. And is there room for something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I do believe that there are things and approaches that can be started at the federal level that can be helpful. To begin with, and it picks up a little bit where you left off at the last panel, I don't know whether people in the audience are aware of this or necessarily familiar with it, but literally within the last day or so, the President's NSTAC, the President's National Security Telecommunications Advisory Committee, is issuing a report that starts from the premise that when the internet was created to begin with, nobody thought about cybersecurity, nobody thought about privacy, nobody built in to the internet that we have today consideration of those risks or dangers that we're now trying to reverse engineer. We're at the point now where as we begin to think about creating the Internet of Things, we've got a little window of opportunity to engineer into the system that we're about to create consideration of how we deal with those issues of security and privacy. And it doesn't necessarily call for a regulatory solution, but I think what the NSTAC is suggesting in the report that they're just issuing is that we've got a little window of opportunity right now to collaborate with NIST, to collaborate with other federal agencies, to use the federal government in part as a laboratory, in part as a source of encouragement to say, let's start engineering those considerations into what we're doing today, and use the federal government as a basis on which to build out the Internet of Things, building into the system from an engineering standpoint, from a standards, a voluntary consensus standards standpoint, those kinds of considerations, so that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we're not saying, oh my gosh, we forgot to think about these things from the outset. I think those sorts of encouragements, inducements, incentives, working with the private sector on a cooperative partnership basis today can be very helpful and can be an encouraging way to move forward.
That's an incredibly important point, actually, and it's exactly what we're seeing now in the test bed that we've created in Montgomery County. Working with NIST and 15 to 20 different private partners, including academic institutions like UC Irvine and MIT. It's not regulation that we want. In fact, some areas we want it to stay away, because some of the things we're doing, using various ultra-narrowband connected sensors and other things, there could be a regulation that comes out tomorrow that makes that entire strategy moot, because we're using some unlicensed shared portion of the spectrum that's good for sensors, not good for much else, but it's really good for sensors and other things. But what we do need is that protocol. We need some standards. We need something that allows the device manufacturers and other folks to actually scale what they're doing. Because if we were to adopt our own particular proprietary approach in the county, and it got adopted maybe a couple of more, we could go through a decade of which standard is better. Is it data or is it this other standard? Is it VCR? Is it Laserdisc? Is it Blu-ray? What's it going to be? And you're going to have competing standards and protocols. I think early on, if we're thoughtful about it, we can kind of shortcut to a place where we've got a relatively clear path. We can scale quickly. We don't spend undue time debating over whose protocol is better, whose standard is better. If we start to collaborate now through institutions like NIST and others, and in test beds like not only mine, but that are popping up all over the place, that's going to help us on the early side bake in cybersecurity, bake in privacy considerations, and educate folks about what it means to have a connected device in your home, that it's not the government spying on you, that you don't have to be scared, it's not going to give you brain cancer, that it's something that we can clearly describe the value and benefits without having to get into debates over whose widget is better than another person's widget.
The other thing I'd add that I'd say the federal government was late to the game on in cybersecurity was public education and awareness. Again, in this area, and I think I only had a chance this morning to skim your new report, Daniel. But I think one of the items in your among your 10 principles was sort of promoting the idea that people shouldn't be scared of this. That there are great advantages to it, there are great opportunities here, and that there are important aspects to this that people should be aware of, people should take advantage of, and at the same time, the federal government can play a role in keeping people alert and aware and educated of what the risks are and what they should be alert to so that they don't do dumb things.
So I just wanted to add on, in the case of standardization, how critical it is in the connected car space. And I'll give you three points that I think are illustrative. One is we need Toyota cars to be able to communicate with Ford cars, right? We need Toyota cars to be able to communicate with any car from any other manufacturer. We also need a car to be able to communicate with the infrastructure in Portland, Oregon, just as it communicates with the infrastructure in Portland, Maine, right? And we also need it to be able to work 12 years from now, right? Because that's how long people keep their cars on average. So there's sort of three, I think, unique challenges in the automotive space where you're dealing with, different manufacturers and mobility and length of time that these things are on the road, that calls for sort of, I don't like to say freezing of standards because that sounds scary, but some sort of, consistency across the country and over time.
Absolutely.
And when you look at vehicles, I mean, you look at like the OBD port on the car, what you can use to actually plug into the car. I mean, these were things that were written in, was it 80, 86?
Something like
94
that.
went
Long
into
time
effect.
ago.
I mean, these were a long time ago, but they're still relevant today when we're seeing automation in cars and the devices that plug into these things. This was based on rules that were written 20 years ago, so we can do forward-thinking rules. It just doesn't happen frequently.
Right.
So I want to go back to this point on standards that everyone here mentioned. And Tanetta, you had actually brought it up, I think, first. We were talking about competition between cities. That ultimately cities are going to be competing in this area. At the same time, they're also collaborating. To Dan's point, to the other point, they still have to figure out how to come together because they want to be able to scale up. You're not going to have each city with its own standards. You're not going to have each city, with its own vendor selling its devices if you want to have efficiency. So how do we merge those two kind of competing issues? How do we have that competition?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, let me clarify. When I say competing, I'm saying competing for jobs.
Sure.
Okay, there is no way that you can have a smart city without having an open infrastructure. There have to be open standards. Okay, so with that, cities are going to be looking at working with companies in a collaborative approach. And this is the way our company does it as well. There's no one company that's going to be able to do this alone. And you take your core capability and work with that city on that particular problem. So what cities that we're working with is that particular trial approach to get what that particular problem is and help them, and that becomes a repeatable model for another city to use. So it is about sharing, but when we say the cities that are the more on the more mature scale of being a smart city, which has that efficiency in transportation, which has more startups and industry growth, has the capability of striving innovation with the youth in the universities and keeping them there and keeping new jobs and putting more jobs. This is where that competition, but it has to be open, and any open data has to be communicated to the citizens of what this is, even your privacy, that needs to be communicated. And then once, just like was noted earlier, that there is that sense of trust, then you spur the innovation. And that's what we have to do. We have to communicate it, and then we go from there. And there's so much that can be done, and that is being done, but it's just once it's known that there is that trust, there is this data, and we can share it. There are so many apps challenges, so many things that there's not enough feet on the street when you look at sensor in your hand, which is a phone. When you think of years ago, how long it took for a computer to go from, I'm aging myself, from 14.4 baud modem to now you've got all of the capabilities and accelerometers in a cell phone, which is a sensor in your hand, in a human. So using that capability, looking at what the youth are doing the app challenges and things like that, there's so much that cities can do by collaborating with its constituents, but making sure that that's open.
Dan or Alan, you want to jump in?
One of the things that we've seen locally as the power company has rolled out smart meters, there was a lot of pushback. People were, and I referenced it earlier, that's a relatively benign piece of technology. It just transmits a little bit of information about power usage, but immediately we saw a fair number of folks really push back against even something that's minimally invasive, relatively, and their concerns were all over the map, from privacy, where they were worried that someone would know when they were not home and would come rob their home, They were worried about health risks. They thought it would give them a tumor of some sort. They thought it would set their house on fire. I mean, these are all letters that we got saying, you need to stop this. This was going to hurt people. So there is so take that example, and now imagine a situation where we're trying to deploy a connected smoke detector to residents that want one that not only does smoke, but does CO, hazardous gases, particulates, dust, mold, pollen. I think we're on the cusp of being able to deploy devices that do so much more to people in vulnerable situations that need it. I mean, that's way more invasive than a smart meter. So there's a tremendous amount of education that we have to engage in moving forward. And we're looking at ways to do that, to engage residents, to take some of the fear factor out of these devices. Because if we're going to do the really interesting stuff, if we're going to do the stuff that actually allows us to predict before someone is in a critical situation, or to be at someone's front door moments after they enter that critical situation, we're going to have buy-in from the community. We're going to have some acceptance that they're going to have to give a little to get a little extra security, and that'll just take time and a lot of education.
And I'd like to piggyback off of that too. I hate the fact that, and you've seen this a lot, that we need to take a strategic approach. And then, as mentioned, make sure we educate citizens on why that's important, because we really rush to do things after there's a tragedy. And that's what we would want to avoid with smart cities. If there's a tragedy, whether it's related to terrorism or whether it's related to weather, what do you do to get the citizens out of that city? If you have that information where now you've got actionable insight, it will tell you which bridges or which location, and with the B2B as it continues to, because of the ITS, will predict this and have a safer city that can be run, whether that command and control center is down or compromised through a hardened iPad anywhere. So what is really important here is, that's why I say, if you have that actionable insight and the predictive analytics, there is, for example, Boston, saying where they can see the traffic and then they can do the lights and adjust it so that get the smoother traffic. Whereas in Singapore, they already have predictive models to know ahead of time how to manage that traffic. So with what we have here in the United States, there is no way we should not be taking advantage of this, but also leading in it in more spaces. So that's been my goal.
I have a funny anecdote to share on that point. You may remember a number of years ago, there was that enormous tsunami in Japan, right? I mean, disaster tsunami. And one of the things that the government did is it asked car companies to activate GPS tracking on vehicles. And the reason for this was then they could see where vehicles were turning around, and that sent a sign of which roadways were blocked, so that they can then tell people not to go that way and instead go another way. That is something that is doable in Japan. I can tell you we wouldn't do that in the United States right now in a million years because of sort of the heightened sensitivity around privacy. And I just offer that as an anecdote because it sort of shows, and privacy is important and it's critical and we need to keep it at the forefront. But sometimes I think there's this hysteria around it that causes us as private sector folks to sort of self-censor, right, on this type of thing that could save lives and get people out of, disaster situations quicker, for example.
Yeah, there's a thoughtful risk-reward analysis that has to go on, and it has to be at, really at the policymaker level, because they can't allow that kind of hysteria that, the folks that think that smart meter is going to, set their house on fire. We can't let that type of hysteria or paranoia drive decision-making. We have to have thoughtful, yes, there might be some things that we deem as private that might have to be opened up a little bit to enable a much greater level of security, a much greater level of security across, the jurisdiction. And I think that's actually where NIST and other bodies play a very important role, because where is that line? And, you know, a local jurisdiction like myself, we don't have the scientists and the expertise and the researchers to say that, you know, a particular amount of particulate in the air is enough to send a firefighter, or to ignore. You know, we don't have enough infrastructure and knowledge to start creating these if-then scenarios and then base our policy decisions on them. It's only through working with organizations like NIST and others and the standards and protocol groups that inform us to say, you know what, we can safely say that we should deploy a firefighter in this situation, but we can safely say that we shouldn't deploy a firefighter in that other situation, because someone will come back to us and say, why didn't you send, this sensor went off, why didn't you send the firefighter? And politicians and policymakers we're paranoid about that situation where it'll come back to us as to, you had all this data, why didn't you do something with it? Or why did you do something with it? That's where we need scientists and folks much smarter than ourselves to inform us.
And I mean, to that point, and you know, to Alan's point as well, about kind of fear in government, how do we, you know, we obviously see, you know, some of these cities that are leading, like Chicago and Boston, New York. You know, these are places where in every single one of those cities you can probably point to some clear city leaders who are not risk averse, who are, you know, putting their name on the line. They're the ones that are championing the technology. They're making it happen. We don't necessarily have those technology champions everywhere. How do we take, you know, traditionally risk averse, you know, conservative in this way with technology and with kind of political realities? How do we still deploy new technology that, you know, some citizens might have concerns about, where they don't know exactly how it will be used, where they do have to do pilot projects? How do we balance those two things?
Some of it can start here in Washington, and some of it can start at the federal level. I'm thinking about some of the examples that we just heard about, and thinking about some of Dan's comments, and you know, we're in the process now of going through a transition to IP technology in our networks, and yet after Hurricane Sandy, where, you know, Lower Manhattan was completely wiped out in terms of old copper infrastructure, as was much of the Jersey Shore, as was much of Long Island. You know, Lower Manhattan is in the process of and has almost been completely replaced with fiber technology now, and we went through a lengthy and unfortunately a controversial situation on the South Shore of Long Island, where people said, you know, no, we insist on still having our old copper lines. Well, you know, copper is an old technology. It's subject to rot in the face of salt water, and you know, there are some people, and I'm looking at Dan because of the example that he just gave.
I'm okay with fiber.
And the example he just gave about people being risk averse, or, you know, wanting old technology as opposed to new technologies. We need some leadership at the federal level that says we're moving forward to a new IP technology, and we have regulatory systems in place that look backward, not forward, and we need to change that. And that's one example of a place where, if we're going to move toward an Internet of Things for the future, and we're going to look toward a new smart cities approach that requires fiber backhaul infrastructure to support smart cities, this is what we need, and this is where the world has to move. We can't have a regulatory structure that requires, on an ongoing basis, constantly having to go back to state and federal regulators to get permission to pull out what is ancient technology, rather than being able to put in the technology of the future.
And look, I'm lucky. I've got a county where I've got a county executive, a county council that has allowed me to create a safe place to fail. And we've got test beds. If I can do pilot programs, I can create prototypes of things. Not a ton of money to do it, but I do have the ability to to go into a senior living facility and knock on doors and ask for volunteers and say, hey, can I deploy this in your home? And explain to them what it is and try to get some buy-in and test devices out. I've got the ability to reach out to companies all over the world who might have something that's useful, that's interesting, that I can put into the test bed, into the ecosystem and try out. But it allows me to demonstrate, really. And I think that's where jurisdictions like myself, we've mentioned Chicago and San Francisco, but there are a lot of interesting places all over the country that have created their test beds. Kansas City, Los Angeles, Asheville, North Carolina, Chattanooga. There are lots of them popping up, and I think it's incumbent upon a lot of those local jurisdictions that have found the leadership to show it, make it real, set up a test bed. Then we want, of course, all you nice companies to give us some tech to show off and demonstrate, but it's incumbent upon us to show it, to make it real to people, show the benefits to folks so that there isn't that fear factor. And then the other jurisdictions, the other folks, they'll come along. I've got counterparts in other cities who, when they ask how did I do it, it's because there was some leadership. There was some folks that weren't too risk averse. And not every jurisdiction has that, so I am lucky in that regard.
I want to open it up to questions from the audience that you guys want to
I just
respond
want to piggyback just off of that, from what I've seen, and I'd like to share this with everyone as well. Those cities, and like you said, there are some smaller ones as well, where this has been successful, is that you have a sponsor and a visionary. That visionary may be the mayor, it might be the city manager, and usually they have in place a CIO, a C-level, that either reports into the mayor or to the city manager. But where you could really make it effective is the different departments. If you have those different departments that then have some kind of weighting, meaning they have to be a part of this and collaborate and come together, and that you have meetings to see what have we done to share data, what have we done to spur this vision forward, then you can see some movement. And I think that's really important, and coming together with public-private partnerships to show where this makes sense, where we solve the problem. But really, it's difficult without having that visionary and having that buy-in across the board.
Thank you. Questions? Yes.
Hi, is this on? Okay, good. Hi, I'm David Fine. I work at a company called Placemeter. I guess this question is mostly directed towards Dan. You said earlier that one of the biggest prospects for you when leveraging the Internet of Things is leveraging private sensor networks. So I wonder how ingesting all of that data into government offices interacts with current open data laws and private companies that want to keep a certain amount of data proprietary so that they can sell it.
That's a great question. I think in a case-by-case basis, the decision to share that data, in part it's market-driven. There has to be some degree of benefit to the company. There has to be a consumer demand to share it. If consumers want Nest to have a feature that allows them to automatically share a set of data with the emergency dispatch system, then Nest will provide that because it's what consumers want. In terms of what it means for us to have that data, that's something that we're actively working through and continually trying to look at. So through working with different policy-making organizations, a lot of conversations with our county attorney, we're looking at what it means to suddenly have this data. Do we own this data? Does that data suddenly become public? We have an Open Data Act in Montgomery County that requires everything that we have, any public data that we own, to be open by default. And then we have to make the case as to whether it should not be public. It's not considered closed by default. So we've put together, and we just released our Open Data Operations Manual, which walks through the steps that we have to take every time that we have a piece of data, and how we determine whether it's should be open, whether it should not be, and if it should be open, what's the priority on opening that data, because it is a cost to us. And not all data is created equal, and not all data is really worth anything. So we've put that process in place. It's relatively new, it's in its infancy, so Come see me at this in 2 years and maybe I'll have a better answer, but that's something we're actively researching.
Thank you. Other questions? If you raise your hand, we'll bring the mic to you.
Hi, I'm Debbie Altenberg with Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. I wanted to talk about maybe some challenges to this ideas of smart cities. One being I didn't really hear two people talk about digital divide is real, especially in cities. There are certainly plenty of people, we joked earlier about everyone in this room having a smartphone, but there's certainly lots and lots of people that don't have them. So how does that sort of factor into this view of a future city? And the other, I think, is the infrastructure issue that you touched on in the example about Sandy, of how many cities, right, unless you have a natural disaster, how many cities are really going to be pushed to say, we are going to do a massive redevelopment in fiber, or whatever the infrastructure is needed, that cities just aren't going to have the capability to really do that sort of massive restructuring of the infrastructure you need for this.
I don't want to talk too much. If we want to take the infrastructure one, or digital divide.
I can say that. I mean, right now, using Verizon, for example, our 4G LTE, our cellular network, which is in place, we've done quite a lot in the M2M space. And that's something you don't hear as much as what we've done as far as pulling energy, transportation, and things like that. The digital divide is definitely real globally. And I just looked at an economic survey that stated that, and that's why I always go back to this as a play regarding economic development. The countries that are high on that digital spectrum area of technology have great economic development. The top on the list was Singapore. And then the bottom three, which my assumption would have been, in third world country, two were in Africa, the very bottom one was Haiti. So it shows you the importance of this when it comes to economic development and jobs. So now let's scope it back to the U.S. and U.S. cities. When it comes to that digital divide, there are ways still to get that through 311 systems that are still coming in through telephone, which then puts that data and then puts it in digital format. But if still there are other ways where industry can work with school systems and try to provide that so that they can have that type of access to whether it's mobile devices. I've seen it, and there's a way that we should continue to look at that seriously, because overall, this is going to help not only our citizens today, but our students for the future.
In Montgomery County, we distribute smoke detectors free of charge to anybody who wants one. We'll come out and change your battery for you, free of charge, if you call us. There's no reason why we can't be using that same distribution mechanism, and it's the firefighters. Firefighters between calls will come out, put one in your home for you. There's no reason why we can't use that same distribution mechanism to deploy a connected device. What we're seeing now in the county among more vulnerable populations is they're pretty likely to have a smartphone of some sort. They might not have a landline, but they're likely to have a cell phone, and they're more likely to have a smartphone in an increasing amount. But that's not IoT, I think, in the sense that we're thinking. So what will it take to deploy a connected device in the same manner that we do with our dome smoke detectors? That's what we're trying to test right now through projects like our Global Cities Team Challenge project with NIST. How do we deploy low-cost, long-range, low-power devices that don't require you to also pay for Wi-Fi in your home, that don't also require you to pay $40 a month for a monitoring service? How do we put that out there? And that's what we're testing, and that's kind of what I want to invest in. I'm less interested in like the $10,000 refrigerator that tells you when you're out of eggs, that kind of thing. I'm more interested in the devices that I can give to a person that's aging in place, or a person that's got a respiratory issue that will help alleviate that and provide them a service.
One interesting angle on this from the vehicle side is, so I started by talking about, I think it's probably the most amazing benefit that's going to come from connected cars, which is using connectivity for crash avoidance technology. And if you think about it right now, there are camera and radar based, and in some cases, you know, sort of LiDAR based, crash avoidance systems that you can buy on vehicles now, but those tend to be very expensive, right? And they tend to be available only on your higher end models. What's interesting about this vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-infrastructure communication capability is it is much cheaper, you know, orders of magnitude cheaper to install that communication capability in a vehicle versus all the cameras and radars and things like that. So in a way, using this sort of Internet of Things idea and motto, we may actually be able to sort of democratize crash avoidance technology, which I think is sort of an interesting angle too. So.
And then when you think about cost, I just wanted to add this one thing. I spoke at the county level and was looking at the counties like as if they were a business and seeing what is your, looking at your business model, what's your major cost and what's your revenue base. So when you look at our cities, we don't have enough revenue that's coming in, especially if a city has less jobs. But when you looked at cost at the county level, there were two, and they were regarding the Health and Human Services and there were the jail system and the justice system. So with that, you can look at ways to where if you're sharing data, which I meant that there's so much data in cities where they have 16 different systems where you can just get them down to 3, you're saving money. Or if you look at what we have devices for ankle braces where a person did not have to be sitting in a jail, which might be 60 to 80,000 per year on the county, whereas if they're using it and it goes into our LTE network, that there's efficiencies there. So it's not just that, don't always look at this is going to cost. Let's look at the cost savings and let's look at also ways of data monetization and revenue generation that also can come with effective data. So I look at that as ways to continue to make cities smarter in addition.
Let me try to talk some about infrastructure costs and maybe bridge the discussion of smart cities with the overall Internet of Things discussion and infrastructure costs. And try to bear with me here and follow a couple of these data points. Right now, today, on any given Saturday night, about 1/3 of all internet traffic in the United States is chewed up by people watching Netflix. The prediction that Cisco makes is that in the next few years, 1/2 of all internet traffic will be consumed by the Internet of Things, by wireless devices and sensors and all the things we've talked about here today. Now, if you think about what it's going to take in terms of the infrastructure to support a transition from people watching TV at home on Saturday night and consuming 1/3 of today's bandwidth to 1/2 of all internet traffic being consumed by the stuff we've talked about today, that's an enormous, enormous investment of capital to build out an enormous amount of additional infrastructure, both wireless and wired. Now, right now, this year, I shouldn't say this year, last year, 2013, the communications industry, meaning wired, wireless, and cable, spent $75 billion in the United States on our capital investment. And if you look at Progressive Policy Institute, they say our industry, the communications industry, spent more money on capital investment in the United States than any other industry in the United States. $75 billion was 10% more than was spent in the previous year. So if you kind of roll it forward and think about how much more money it will take year after year after year to build out that infrastructure, that's hundreds of billions of dollars over the next several years. I don't anticipate that cities are going to be the ones building out that infrastructure. Cities will probably be the ones spending the money to place the sensors, to put in the processors, to build the data centers or information centers necessary to aggregate the information that they need to perform municipal tasks. And there may be other Toyota may be having its responsibilities to deal with what it does with cars, et cetera. Various government entities may be doing other things. Nest may be working on Nest products, et cetera, but there's an enormous amount of infrastructure underlying that needs to support it. And I guess the main point that I want to make is from the standpoint of, I'll get a little controversial here for you because we're going to juice the thing up a little bit. There's a big proceeding right now at the FCC, and one of the main focuses of that proceeding is how is that underlying infrastructure going to be regulated in the future. And if you take a look at an economic paper that U.S. Telecom filed recently, within the last couple of weeks, by two economists, a bipartisan team. Rob Shapiro worked for the Clinton administration, and Kevin Hassett, who's pretty much AEI, pretty much a Republican economist. The conclusion they come to is if we go the route of trying to regulate that infrastructure under Title II, try to make it a common carrier, public utility style regulated entity, you're going to lose tens of billions of dollars a year or over the course of 5 years of what they looked at in investment. And they just looked at 5 companies, 5 wireline companies. If you multiply that out over the entire industry, wireless, cable, and other wireline companies, it's a lot more money. So the main message is do no harm.
We're at time, so I'll stop us there. We did have planned a break right now. We're going to reshuffle something briefly. Congresswoman Delbeni is here now, so we're going to move her up, and then we'll take a break. First, join me in thanking this excellent person. So next, it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Congresswoman Susan Delbeni, who represents Washington's 1st Congressional District. Congresswoman Delbeni has deep expertise as a technology entrepreneur and business leader. In addition to a long career at Microsoft, she served as CEO and president of Nimble Technology, a business software company, and helped start drugstore.com. In Congress, Representative Delbeni is a member of the IP subcommittee of the House Judiciary Committee, as well as a member of the Agriculture Committee, both which, of course, have interesting positions in areas where the Internet of Things is very alive today. So please join me in welcoming Congresswoman Delbeni.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here. I want to thank the Center for Data Innovation for convening this conversation because we've just seen incredibly diverse technology evolving at an incredible speed, and it's very, very important that we have discussion about policy and how that impacts that innovation. As was mentioned, my district, I'm from the 1st Congressional District of Washington State, so just outside of Seattle all the way up to the Canadian border. My district is a great example of innovation. We have the headquarters of Microsoft and Nintendo of America. We have a big campus for Google in my district. A lot of technology as well as biotechnology, medical device manufacturers, bioinformatics, a lot of great work happening in new areas as folks come together. And I came to Congress after a background working in technology for many years. I was elected in 2012. And my background has been working on many of these issues, but in a slightly different capacity. I started my career actually at Microsoft working on email, and I wanted to highlight email because when I started working on email back in 1989, you could send email to people who are on the same email system you were on, but you couldn't send email to other folks. And we were working on products called gateways so that one email system could connect to another email system. Things like Network Courier and CC Mail and things like that, for those of you who can go back far enough with me. And yet, so it was very much an internal communication system as opposed to a connected system. And one of the jobs I had was working with standards bodies to come up with standards for interoperability between email systems. So we had common message standards so that now when you send an email to someone else, you aren't worried about what product they're going to use to read the email on, what device they're going to have. And it shows you how important it is that we make decisions, because now we all think of, email and other types of communications as universal, and that happened because early on in early days of the technology, folks had to figure out ways how that information was going to be shared and utilized. Another area I worked on was embedded systems. And so when we talk about things, the Internet of Things, it's important to remember that we've had smart devices for a very long time, devices that had processors and technology embedded in them, that were, things from gas station pumps and sewing machines, that were using, earlier versions of operating systems and other things inside them to help them do more intelligent things. Sometimes it was as simple as being able to read a credit card to make a payment, but that has been the evolution, actually, devices that eventually led to smart devices and now cellularly connected devices, but really has formed the basis of what we are seeing today in terms of this broad Internet of Things. And so it's important that we think about some of the decisions that were made to let these areas grow and get to where they are today, and use that as a learning experience when we think about the policy and decisions we need to make to help that expansion move forward. I think that it's very clear that the policy decisions we make today can't be based just on technology that exists today, or else they're going to be out of date tomorrow. And it's going to be critical for policymakers to have a point of view of what we need to do from a policy standpoint, what might need to be done, but also to leave the door open for future innovation and make sure that policy doesn't block that. Because we have incredible products in incredible different industries and areas, from internet connected cars, some of the things you were talking about earlier, wearable health technology, we're seeing a big explosion there, smart crock pots or devices in your home. The evolution is great in all of these different types of devices and can have real benefits for people's quality of life, but it's going to be important that we realize that there's not a cookie cutter here, there's not just one type of technology, and it overlaps many, many different areas. And so we're going to need to understand whether it's privacy or data security or spectrum or broadband infrastructure, as folks were just talking about, or issues related to specific verticals like healthcare or energy, how we put policy together that is going to allow the growth of future technologies. And we also have to realize that for consumers to have the benefit that's important for them, we need to look at areas where policy might need to change to make sure consumers have access to this information. But one key area that we've seen, and I want to give you a specific example that we've been working on in judiciary right now on where policy has been out of date and the impact that has, is on privacy and electronic communications. I'm on the Judiciary Committee, as we were talking about earlier, and there's been a lot of talk this Congress about the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, or what's affectionately known as ECPA in the acronym world. Now, as technology people, you all know that there's always acronyms for everything, so we obviously have policy acronyms too. ECPA was written in 1986. I started working on email at Microsoft in 1989, and I was telling you a little bit about what the world was like then when I was working there. In fact, when I came to work at Microsoft, I had a terminal on my desk to get connected mail, and then most people weren't using a desktop-based email system at that time. And so this is a policy that was written in 1986, and we're talking about updating it right now. So it's definitely out of date, and it's a situation where law definitely hasn't kept up to date with technology. This piece of paper, you need a warrant if you have this piece of paper in a file cabinet in your office, but if you have a digital copy of the information here up in the cloud, there may not be a warrant required, there may not be a warrant standard for that information. And so we have a disparity between how physical documents, for example, are treated and digital documents are treated. And that's very, very important in terms of people's understanding of how they want to use different technologies and the impact that it might have. And so we've been working very hard to update the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, because we want to make sure that consumers also are aware of the privacy protections they have. And many people aren't aware that there's a difference. They just assume that the protections would be the same in the digital world as they are in the physical world. I'm a co-sponsor of a piece of legislation to reform the Electronic Communications Privacy Act to create a warrant standard for electronic information. And there's a bill that many of you may have heard of called the Email Privacy Act. It has over 270 co-sponsors. Many of these are not partisan issues whatsoever, large bipartisan support. But there's also another bill that I helped introduce with Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren and Congressman Ted Poe that's aimed at reforming ECPA that also gives clarity on geolocation data. One thing that's very important is we have many devices, and I know all of you have probably at least one in your pocket, where geolocation information is now being used in many cases, and we see more and more emerging innovative areas using location-based services. And so how geolocation information is treated is going to be important, as well as cars and other areas that have GPS technology. And understanding how that information can be used, or for example, how law enforcement, is there a warrant standard for that information, is also important. And these are areas, again, where technology has advanced greatly, but policy has not. And I would argue 1986 is a pretty long time ago to be looking at policy today. Another example that's a little bit on a slightly different topic, but will highlight the issue for you in a different way, is also on the IP Subcommittee of Judiciary. We've been talking about copyrights. We had the registrar of the Copyright Office at a hearing to speak, and she said the last major update to the Copyright Act was in 1976, so even 10 years before that. She said it took about 15 years for folks to negotiate that bill, and she felt like it was out of date when it was implemented. So when I talk about saying that if we implement policy based on technology today, it'll be out of date, these are good examples where if we aren't good stewards of policy and make sure that not only do we have policy up to date, but also that we keep it up to date and we make changes as we see it's coming out of date, we can actually do a better job of making sure we don't have policy that gets woefully out of date, and then actually it's a little bit more of a challenge to get it back to a place where it's consistent with the way the world works today. There's going to be more education that needs to happen. Many of these issues are complicated issues. Many people don't understand them well or in depth. We are continuing to get more technology people involved in our policy making, but it's going to be very, very important that innovators and folks who are working in technology have a strong voice and make sure they're part of the conversation, or educating folks on the impact that policy can have, and understanding, once again, the way things actually work today, and how different decisions impact in what direction things may go in the future, or impact different types of business models. In the end, we want to create a level playing field going forward when we put policy together. So there's going to be more information that's going to need to be necessary in education. If we talk about the Internet of Things, you've seen a lot of members of Congress running around with bans on Fitbits and things like that. So they are using things like that, but there's obviously a broad array of technologies that people need to understand and experience and understand out there that they may not use as much every day. And it's because it's going to have a big impact not only on people's lives, but also has a huge economic impact, and it's a huge economic opportunity for all of us and for innovation right here in the United States. And it will also make a big difference in many areas that are important to all of us: energy efficiency, our environment, healthcare, so many areas where we do a good job of innovation here, we're going to see a huge difference. It's going to mean a lot of listening. It's going to, again, means that we need to sit down and have these conversations and have an ongoing conversation. And that's, I guess, the one thing that I really want to encourage of all of you is engage in the conversation and keep it going. Because as a tech person coming in, working in Congress, I think we haven't necessarily kept these conversations going as much as we need to. As we see this explosion, especially in many areas, as opposed to kind of isolating technology and thinking of it as something that has to do with just a computer or a tablet, now as people think of it much more broadly, that's an incredible opportunity, but also a very, very important area for all of us to have a conversation and make sure that we have an environment that allows that to grow. So I want to thank you not only for the work that's been done so far, but I also want to make sure that everyone takes from this that we should have an ongoing dialogue going forward. I encourage that and want to participate in that myself with all of you going forward. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you for those remarks, and thank you for helping push that dialogue in Congress. So we're going to take a very brief break and come back here in 10 minutes or less. And there's coffee outside if you'd like that. There's also the restrooms outside. And when we come back, we'll be hearing from Senator Schatz. Thank you. Next, we're going to be hearing from Senator Schatz. Senator Schatz is a member of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, and he chairs the subcommittee on tourism, competitiveness, and innovation. In these roles, Senator Schatz provides an important voice for what the Internet of Things means for U.S. competitiveness and economic growth. And he's really going to be instrumental in addressing many of the important policy questions that come with this new technology. So please join me in welcoming Senator Schatz.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to the Center for Data Innovation, which has convened a really important discussion. And I guess the first thing I want to say is that it's something you may already know, but it's worth repeating, which is that the thing about the Internet of Things is that nobody's heard about it, that people don't understand what it is, and they're not even intuitively in touch with what it is. They may understand that your Fitbit can do a few things or that devices are increasingly integrated. But I think it's important when you think about public policy moving forward to understand that we are on the cusp of a certain kind of technological revolution, but that the public is not yet aware that it's happening at the scale that it's happening. And when we talk about making public policy, we're going to have to actually lead public opinion and move forward together rather than respond to public opinion. I don't think that any time in the next 2, 3, 4 election cycles that my constituents are going to be demanding that I make smart public policy on the Internet of Things, even though it's very likely one of the most important things we could be doing on the Commerce Committee. But I wanted to give you that context, and it's a good reminder for me that nobody knows what this thing is, and yet it's incredibly important. Every second, nearly 100 things are being connected. Things most people know about include smartphones and activity tracking wristbands, but the reality is that while few people know the term the Internet of Things, they're already exposed to this technology when they cross the street or wash their hands. It's estimated that by 2020, 50 billion devices will be connected to the Internet, making it a multi-trillion-dollar market, and the number of devices will continue to grow. But a recent study showed that 70% of widely used IoT devices had security vulnerabilities, 70%. So policymakers actually have no choice in this space. We must take on this topic both because of its scope and its potential benefits and dangers. The benefits are enormous, and we've seen the beginning of it in the state of Hawaii as we start to work on the smart grid. Our challenge in the state of Hawaii is we have high penetration of intermittent renewable energy, and we have island by island grids, and we have the headquarters of the Pacific Command on the island of Oahu. All that adds up to lots of grid challenges and instability and power quality challenges, and so the DOE, the DOD, and the private sector are investing a fair amount of money and some of their best researchers in an IoT project, and several IoT projects that are smart grids and microgrid enterprises. But beyond this, these connected devices are saving lives. Wearable devices can already help to alert commercial truck drivers when they should stop driving and rest. Smart watches, of course, monitor signs of epileptic seizures and will alert a family member or a caregiver when a seizure occurs. Bridges outfitted with sensors will help engineers learn about structural problems before it's too late. We have our first fixed guideway rail system being built on the island of Oahu, and I have no doubt that some of this IoT technology will be integrated. And connected hand washing stations at hospital can help prevent the spread of infections. But with all those benefits, there are significant risks, both privacy and security. This summer, a team of University of Michigan researchers showed that network traffic lights are vulnerable to cyber attacks and perpetrators who hack internet-enabled baby monitors to harass young children have not yet been caught. So with these issues, there's a real question about who has the responsibility and the authority for managing risk on behalf of the public. And I would submit to you this. I am a private sector-oriented Democrat. But there are certain things government has to do, and this is one of them. We are going to have to get engaged. My own philosophy is that we should have a light hand, but we still need to have a firm hand. I took one golf lesson one time in my life, and the only thing, I don't do it, but I remember what he told me to do, which is when you hold the golf club, you're supposed to hold it like a tube of toothpaste, which is to say, tightly enough so you don't drop it, but not so tight that you squeeze it. That's kind of squeeze the toothpaste out. That's my philosophy when it comes to regulating these matters. I think we need to have a firm enough hand to have some rules of the road to ensure security and privacy, but not to snuff any of this great innovation out. One of the challenges is the alphabet soup of agencies that have regulatory oversight over these questions. The FTC is involved in privacy issues. The FCC will be involved in the spectrum usage. The FAA is working on finalizing regulations for drones. The National Highway Transportation Safety Administration is working on regulating intelligent vehicle technology, and the FDA will be involved in the medical device side. That's probably not even a complete list, but you can see for policymakers that this is going to get unwieldy very, very fast. The risks to security and personal privacy will be at the forefront of many consumers' minds, and with the right actions on the part of industry and government, will earn and maintain public trust. But the scale of the Internet of Things will require us to think in new ways about privacy. For instance, while some devices will interact directly with the consumer, others, like connected airplane engines, will operate principally in the industrial space. So we'll need different sets of considerations for personal data than for other data, while at the same time accommodating for the interconnectivity of personal data with other data in the Internet of Things. The debate will continue over the value of comprehensive federal privacy legislation that governs the collection, use, and sale of personal information by private companies. Our current privacy framework consists of several laws that address specific risks, but could leave some areas without adequate regulation. And so we need a balanced approach. Because of the technology's rapid pace of advancement, any legislation should be principles-based and avoid being overly rigid. This is an example of an area where we should do what Wayne Gretzky always talked about, which is we have to anticipate where the puck is going to be rather than skate towards the puck at its current time. And this is going to be an incredible challenge as we see the exponential growth and the sort of unpredictable directions of the opportunities, that we don't want to end up where we are, frankly, right now with cable television, with other telecommunications issues, with a statutory infrastructure that is outdated almost as soon as it passes. And so we need a flexible regulatory regime on the statutory side that establishes some basic principles and rules of the road, and allows the various regulatory agencies with jurisdiction over these issues to iterate this thing over time. And so what I wanted to come to tell you is that I think it's good news that the Senate is starting to engage on this issue, but I think the questions in front of us are too numerous to answer right now. There is the question of how firm of a hand, which is, I think, going to be both a practical and an ideological question. There's also the question of how fast to move. I think if we try to move too fast, you could see positions hardening, and it would become something like the internet sales tax issue, where people have just picked their camps and there's going to be no movement, I think, for quite a long time. And so I think there's a saying in Hawaii that is, go slow to go fast, which is to say, you want to move as fast as you can, but if you start to move too fast, then you're never going to get anywhere. And so I think we need to be the world's greatest deliberative body. We need to use the bipartisan nature of the Commerce Committee, and it is one of the few remaining committees in the Senate, where there's really a good partnership between Republicans and Democrats. Start oversight, start questions, explore these policy questions together and to try to get it right. This is not an easy question to answer. I think government has a role, but I'm very interested in allowing the Internet of Things to thrive. I see tremendous opportunities in energy. I see tremendous opportunities in defense. I see tremendous opportunities for consumers, but I also see some significant challenges in terms of privacy and security. And so I hope to be one of the people working with my colleagues in the Senate, with the administration and with the private sector, and with the Center for Data Innovation to try to get this right collectively. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Schatz. And I'd like to invite our next panel up, which will be talking about smart industry. I'd also like to invite Travis Corte, who's a research analyst at the Center for Data Innovation. He'll be moderating this panel. Travis.
Thanks, Daniel. So our third panel tonight is on smart industry. It's sort of funny to have conversations about data innovation with people from industry, just because there's kind of a sense of been there, done that. You know, we're talking about in government a lot these days. We're talking about automation and cybernetics and control systems and automated monitoring. You know, these have been happening for decades in industrial contexts. I don't think that's the kind of conversation that we're going to be having about the Internet of Things, because I think there is a sort of a fundamental departure going on. We're not talking about these individual systems that I've just been mentioning. We're talking about bridging gaps between systems, creating systems of systems, looking at things from a higher level with the new information that we get from these connected devices. When you hear the famous story about the Raytheon factory where they know how many times every screw is turned, that's not just a measurement project. They're not just throwing that in a spreadsheet and checking it and saying, okay, you know, that's probably going into a predictive model with 100 other factors to predict the failure of some systems. And then it's probably going into a data warehouse so that some imaginative operations research analysts down the line can think of something interesting to do with it. The point is sort of reducing information leakages between these multiple systems. The point is not the screw. The point is the information landscape overall. So I mean, I think that it's going to be interesting to talk about these sorts of issues with industry, in part because they are so experienced in these other aspects of data-driven innovation, and also because there are a lot of implications, both for the industries themselves and also for U.S. competitiveness. And it's really we're going to have a lot to learn from industry, having as they've been harbingers before of sort of new realms of data innovation. So I'd like to introduce my panel. First we have Kate Jackson, who's a knowledge expert at the McKinsey Center for Government. Next to her we have Alexa Moreira, Deputy Staff Director at the House Energy and Commerce Committee. And then Eric Miller, who is the Vice President of Policy, Innovation, and Competitiveness at the Canadian Council of Chief Executives. And finally, Dr. Sakwu Ri, who is the Associate Director of Internet of Things and Cyber Physical Systems at NIST. So the first question that I'd like to direct to the panel today is continuing along this theme of what is fundamentally different. You know, this is not just, we're not just talking about sensors here. We're talking about something that goes beyond that in some kind of qualitative way. So just if you can give me some thoughts on, with the situation with the Internet of Things, what is fundamentally different? What are the new opportunities that weren't possible before?
So I'll start. So what's fundamentally different? Well, you've got a possibility to radically know more about what's going on in everything. So you take, for example, a power plant that has sensors in it. You know that it is set to fail before it fails. So you can take measures to mitigate the problem. You have a capacity to with your factory that Raytheon has with turning screws. I mean, I'm sure that in future, the episode of how it's made that shot at that Raytheon factory will look very different. But you have the ability to build things to a level of precision, to know where they are, that is really quite radical. One of the things, we're releasing today a major report on 45 ways to make North America more competitive. And one of the things that we've talked about is using big data in the supply chain. But what this goes to is changing how you do certain processes of government. So where does industry interface with the regulatory process? And so what we've suggested is you provide incentives by changing how you do import administration to companies so that they will visualize or make transparent their supply chain. So all of a sudden, that the importer of record bringing something in at the Port of Long Beach knows what's going on 4, 5, 6 stages back in their supply chain. And you know what happens when there's dark markets that become light? You realize that your suppliers were overcharging their suppliers, and all of a sudden you get productivity enhancements and you get price reductions. And you know what? You also get security improvement. And so you get public benefits and you get private efficiency enhancements. And the ability to know where things are and to see patterns of where things are is just something that is so radically different. I mean, I'm sure that when Henry Ford put together the River Rouge factory with 100,000 workers in 1912, that it looked radically different. But this gets us to a level of efficiency and productivity that was unforeseen in the past.
I think in some ways there's a difference between the old way and the new way in that the Internet of Things creates new opportunities, but it also mandates a new set of capabilities to get that work done. So you're driving down the road in Japan and the billboard changes based on the characteristics of the car you're driving and the information about your purchasing patterns. You're sick from a cardiac disease and you have a monitoring device in your body that can signal to your doctor, partly because Ginger.io also has information from NIH, real time knowing what are the symptoms and signs of onset of an additional cardiac arrest that your doctor can get in real time. Those are some ways. A paper and pulp manufacturer that was able to save 15% of its energy costs by conducting the kiln slightly differently and calibrating it perfectly in a way that the human eye can't do, saving energy costs and increasing production. Those are ways that the Internet of Things changes the accuracy, the capabilities of companies, and fundamentally it kind of enables a reimagination of what a product can be. You might not have thought a product could be a constantly changing billboard sign, or what you do now with that additional cost savings as a paper and pulp manufacturer. But it takes a set of capabilities that not all companies and not all governments have today. And in some ways, I think there's a continuum for a lot of companies from going from just being able to analyze data, knowing what data really matters, what data are the drivers of decisions versus the totality of data that's so exciting to think, oh, well, now we have all these millions of people with over 1 billion people with a smartphone, but do you know what information about that smartphone pattern really matters? Do you have the data analytic capabilities, the centers of excellence that can inform business decisions? Thinking now, I think the other big change to include on that is, so it's changed products, changed interaction with the world, and then a changed role of IT within a company. So IT isn't necessarily just a service provider anymore. It's a critical part of the business strategy of an organization. And I think you see that in the last panel where we have chief information officers, chief digital officers at a municipal, state, and country level now too. So government is following where business has gone, which is to say, we're going to turn this into a business strategy capability.
So, yeah, if I want to add something, I want to rephrase the question a little bit. It's not about what is fundamentally different with IoT. It's more about what is fundamentally different with IoT now. Because IoT itself is not new. It's been around for a long time. I started with M2M like 20, 30 years ago, talked about WSN, wireless sensor networks, and IoT, and there are a lot of brand names out there that companies created too. question is why now? For the last few years. Historically, IoT has been around. It's just that a lot of people started getting aware of this IoT just for the last few years. And why? What's different? Well, at the end of the day, if you look at the IoT for the last few years, before 2 years, it's really about connectivity. So people are saying, I have a sensor, and I need a wireless. I need a wireless. I want to connect it to wireless. They put tons of money and investment into that, getting that working. How we better connect the hub. And recently, things have started changing a little bit because of a lot of understanding about big data analysis. Now, it's not just about connecting my thermostat to like this furnace over there, which you can still do without even wireless or anything like that. But now people start thinking that now if you aggregate this data, not in a small scale, but in mass scale, you can extract very useful information on it. Not just temperature at 3 or 5 in the morning or anything like that. You can get patterns. You can get some useful energy information. You can get something that is not obtainable before. That's what's really driving IoT. So if we look at the question, what is fundamentally different in IoT? It is really about how you make new business models based on these technologies. So think about it. I mean, there are a lot of sensor manufacturers who want to make money out of this. They're going to have new business models with new sensors, wireless, all that. But at the end of the day, the industry has to really spend a little more time, and they are spending more time on how they use this new knowledge to really build a new business case, business model, which may not be the same as what they've been doing the last 100 years. So think of industrial revolution. I mean, it fundamentally changed the landscape of the industry. And personally, I believe IoT can do a very similar thing. Question is, who's going to get this first?
I think from a public policy standpoint, if the question is why now, I think that is a good question because it's not new. But it is why now from a policy making standpoint. I think it's why now because it is being more widely deployed and because it is reaching consumer side. So it's not just an industry, but some of the adoption within industry is actually, excuse me, it is actually now consumer facing. And so we have questions about privacy within energy sensors. And so that's where there starts to be increased, at least policy-making discussions around this, because there are questions that we have not had to grapple with before, even for as long as Internet of Things has been around in some degree in industry.
Well, let's push ahead a little bit on the sort of policy side. I'd like to hear both from the people thinking from the perspective of the private sector and also from our government panelists. What do you think are the areas in greatest need of sort of policy intervention in this area, and where can government help ASAP?
So, I guess from my perspective, number one is privacy. This is a huge concern. I mean, there's the Internet of Things and the Internet of People. And when it comes to the Internet of People, there's an awful lot of concern about privacy. And some of that is who's doing what, to whom, with what data. It's also about the vulnerabilities of cybersecurity. And so that's something which I think will become important. And also standard setting, frankly. This is, as you network everything, some things can be made more resilient than others. And so this is about a lot of what NIST does in terms of standard setting and how do we build resilient systems. So if you're building a networked refrigerator, are there ways to make that more resilient than others? Are there ways to ensure that the data flow from the refrigerator to Peapod to tell them to bring me some milk is actually not compromised? And so there's all sorts of things you have to think through on both the privacy front and the standards front.
So traditionally, government has two methods of getting things done. One is carrot, the other is stick. Which means, carrot means you have R&D funding to get new technologies done and develop new technologies. Carrot is really, that's a carrot, and stick is more regulation and all those kind of, which is critical in getting, making sure things are safe and things are in order. I believe there are a third way of doing it from the government perspective, which is about providing playground. And it is related, very much related to standards, actually. as you mentioned, standards is extremely important part of IoT, and more important than anything else in the world, or historically. Problem is, there are too many standards out there. And as one of the panelists talked about fragmentation, that's exactly what it is with IoT. Everybody claims they have their own standard. Every company is creating their own thing. All these standard bodies in the world are creating their own IoT standards, which are not interoperable with each other. In this environment, things are not going to move fast enough. So how do we do it? There are a couple of different ways of doing it. One is as a big brother, whoever that is, or a big authority, writes down a standard in a paper and asks all the manufacturers or the companies to use it. That's one way to do it, which works in a lot of cases. The other way of doing it in IoT, especially when there are already a lot of existing standards are competing, what government may be able to do is provide a playground that these different standards, different solutions and different requirements can kind of either work together or even compete together. And they can kind of figure out which one works and which doesn't work. Right? It will happen no matter what in the market. Market is going to figure out. The question is how fast the market can get there and what is the role of the government to accelerate the process. And so NIST is working on, obviously the program that I call the Global Cities Challenge, which was a follow-up program that's called the Smart America Challenge. The goal is to provide those kind of playgrounds to IoT manufacturers and cities, and we talked about smart city before this session, so that they can test it out and what works and what doesn't work. And hopefully what works can be adopted by other cities, and that means it's replicated at scale. So that's kind of one comment I have.
I would add to the issues that have been covered, data security. You've suddenly got companies and industries that had not been in the data collection business that suddenly are collecting massive amounts of data. And so we've been looking at whether this is an area where some federal preemption is necessary to have a uniform standard for data security. It's related to the privacy question, certainly, but I think that it is a distinct area. Another area that's really emerged for us in our work is regulatory certainty. When you're looking at all the possibilities in medical apps, wearables, things like that, there's uncertainty in how they'll be defined and regulated by FDA. Are they going to be medical devices regulated through the traditional pre-market approval process? That will be incredibly chilling to the rapid pace of technological development. But you're already seeing concern on the part of some major innovators about how regulatory the health space is. And so I think our challenge is to find a way to maintain the safety of health-related devices in other areas while still promoting that innovation and allowing industry to be more nimble and move quickly.
The McKinsey Global Institute released a couple of studies in the last year that capture the economic value creation potential of the Internet of Things as well as open data. And I'm connecting the two because so many of the newer Internet of Things, the now Internet of Things like you were describing, relies on open data as a noun, a thing, and then big data analytics as the verb, and the Internet of Things as sort of the amplifier to create new products and services. So we look at $6.2 trillion that can be created from the Internet of Things by 2025, and $3 to $5 trillion of economic value from open data every year, just in 7 domains of consumer finance, electricity, oil and natural gas, education, transportation, healthcare, and energy itself. What we found in looking at what government's role is in both the Internet of Things and in open data being the underlying platform and source for so much that can be analyzed later, is that the government has 4 main roles as a policymaker, and some of that is around safety and security, but also standards internally for how data is coded, how it's released. As a provider, determining, and I know Census and other agencies, NOAA, have such rich data sources, but deciding what to publish, how frequently, in what format, as a provider, signaling that provision as well to industry is vital. And then government as a user, if you see governments are now in India being able to use climate detection to deter certain pests and crops because they have real-time information. As a user, police departments are using crime information that's from Internet of Things sensors in cities to deter vandalism. And then the catalyst, I think, is where we've seen a lot of need and innovation and probably a lot of excitement in rooms like these with hackathons and data paloozas, in addition to supporting an R&D pipeline with Patent and Trade Office efficiency itself. So I think those four roles are integrated. They're not necessarily, they're actually connected. They're not a journey along a pathway. Government as that policymaker, provider, user, and catalyst is I think where we see both the future and so much of the promising activity happening today.
So this is a good opportunity, I think, to talk about an issue that that all the panelists have been skirting around a little bit, which is sort of the economics of the Internet of Things. That is the sort of the macro effects that we're going to feel in the industrial economy from smartness. And you know, this can be taken a lot of ways. You know, how does more information make it easier to create niche markets? You know, sensors are cheap. Does that affect barriers to entry? Things like this. So I wonder if any of you can talk about sort of how these technologies might change the macro economic landscape, and then how I suppose policymakers can enable this to happen as it should.
I guess every time you have a massive leap forward in technology, it creates new winners and losers. And some stuff's going to become cheaper and some stuff's going to become more expensive. And there are going to be people who have niche companies on doing predictive analytics on some micro aspect of power generation or whatever it is, or doing protection. And so I think generally speaking, when you think about the possibilities of money saved, there's a lot of that. If you're running a big capital-intensive industry, there's a lot of nooks and crannies where you lose value presently that you can help to save value going forward. But on the other hand, much like I spent no money buying apps 10 years ago, and I spend money buying apps today, there are also new cost centers which will emerge. And so I think it'll catalyze a whole different industries or micro niches, and ultimately it will raise GDP of the United States and of other countries around the world that participate in it. But there'll be a reallocation of value and a certain shifting of who's doing what.
So, if I take the next step, there are two different ways of looking at it, the impact in the industry. First one is really purely from product and service perspective. New product, new sensors, new networks, new services based on it. For example, like companies are creating new products based on this new connectivity. That's going to sell, and it's going to sell good. The question is it going to be the majority of the benefit to the industry? So really, the majority of benefit, I think, will really come from what you're going to do on top of these new technologies and new products. I'll give you an example. If a city wants to put CCTV camera all over the city, for example, how many cameras do you think they're going to install? Thousands, maybe? And how much revenue is going to generate for that company's making? Yeah, it's going to good revenue, but it's not going to be groundbreaking. However, if you create a new type of service that sits on top of the data collected by the CCTVs, suddenly you are going to make a lot of, probably orders of magnitude difference type of business opportunities out of it. It's almost unlimited business opportunities. I think that's where the IoT is going to really shine, and that's where a lot of companies is focusing on and will focus on.
Okay, so I mean, I think it's not a very far leap from this conversation to then talking about competitiveness. And Eric, I liked your broadening earlier of thinking about North American competitiveness. That way we can talk to you too. So I guess what I'm interested in hearing about from you is sort of, do North American firms have a unique advantage in this space, and sort of where are the gaps, and sort of what can be done around this.
So I think the center of excellence for the moment is in the United States. And there are good reasons for that. I'm not so sure that you're going to see the digital economy in Europe progress perhaps the way it could with things like right to be forgotten, privacy regimes. There's a certain relationship between individuals and data and the private sector and the public sector, which you need at least a priori to be the groundbreaking country or the groundbreaking region on this. And I think that dynamism here, coupled with venture capital and a tradition of entrepreneurship, really plays well. If you're a Canadian firm, and all of our members, we represent the CEOs of the largest firms in Canada, and every one of them have major U.S. operations, and most of their manufacturing is integrated. One of our members, Bombardier, for example, they are literally a NAFTA product where they do the design in Canada, they build the wings in Querétaro in Mexico, and they assemble in Wichita, Kansas. And they are investing very heavily in visualization technology. And so Canada is going to be there to play a part of it. But I think if the United States continues to play its cards right, and I think one area of vulnerability which I would point to that will have to be addressed is some working through or common understanding on privacy. Because the biggest threat that I see out there right now is what I call cyber Westphalianism. And so you've got China going its own way, you've got Europe going its own way, India's doing its own way, and then you've got North America. The question is, how do you connect all of these up? And I think the United States is extraordinarily well positioned to take advantage of this, but the Achilles heel is really about privacy. So if you can figure out what the regime is around that and get a way to deal with it, then I think they can be that this country could really continue to lead. The other question, of course, and this is also a societal choice, will be to how do the ramifications of the Snowden revelations play out 5 years hence, and what is the relationship between national security and the internet, and so how the Internet of Things plays out is very much related to how the internet evolves and whether it fragments or whether it continues to evolve using a multi-stakeholder model.
A couple of builds on that. One gap or promised land, in a sense, is around the skill set that it takes to do the big data analytics work that will drive insights to improve performance in companies or within government. So there's an estimate that there's going to be between 140 and 160,000 jobs missing in 10 years, employable people missing because they don't have the skills in the United States to do the work of big data analytics, to be that business unit translator between all of the fascinating insights that you can glean from the Internet of Things measuring RFID on freight. But if you don't have someone there who knows how to analyze that data, it's not going to work. So we've, at McKinsey, pioneered an approach called education to employment that connects major employers with community colleges, vocational programs, through universities as well, and says, well, what are the standards that it's going to look like for that curriculum? Who do you need to hire? What are the core 100 classes that can more universally be applied, so not every community college in this country is individually trying to craft a program just to meet the needs of the one local employer who may not even be there for a long time. So I think some of these are not actually big technology or big data solutions. They're actually kind of stakeholder engagement and saying, well, we're going to need the people as a critical input. Otherwise, North America, the United States, might fall behind. I think the other way we could fall behind is not to realize the power of the Internet of Things to kind of identify new markets outside of the US. So mobile devices and mobile banking in Africa have enabled huge microfinancing regimes, but now also big banks are realizing, oh, I have so much more information now about a citizen I never would have understood in Kenya to understand their lending profile and price appropriately a loan to that small business owner. And so I think a piece of it too is for US companies to be able to sell and identify products in the global market through the Internet of Things. And then the security and privacy issue is so vital. We've seen, particularly in the education field, a lot of concern from parents that student data will be used kind of maliciously or in just uncontrolled ways at the end of a student's career, say, and not that it might limit someone from getting into college. And so there was a big organization called In Bloom that the Gates Foundation funded around kind of Internet of Things and open data for student education. And there was a huge backlash because the stakeholder community of parents and students and educators, it seemed to many, could have been brought in earlier and helped define what those standards look like, or at least be part of identifying the benefits. Because if all that's being told is we're going to get a lot of data, to people who know the end of that sentence, it's exciting, but to people who don't think the end of that sentence is, and I'm going to have way too much known about me by the government, you need to engage early.
So,
anything else?
Yeah, so my observation about U.S. competitiveness in IoT, the European government has been traditionally invested a lot more money, I would say huge amount of funding from the government perspective in IoT for a long time, more than 10 years, I'll say. There were many, many different programs, funding programs mostly, not just IoT and smart cities and everything. So in that regard, you can say European government has been ahead of the US government in that sense. However, what I think it makes really compensate that difference is the private sector investment. A lot of investment from private sector has been made. We talked about venture capital, larger corporations. They have been making a lot of investment, probably more than what European companies have been doing. So is it US ahead or behind? It's a very hard question to answer. Hard question to answer. But I would say in general, US is much more proactive in private sector. And I think it's a good way to keep their heads ahead.
Okay, I'd like to move to some audience questions now. Surely someone's got. Okay, they're kind of in the middle. Sorry, could you just identify yourself first?
In terms of the McKinsey projections about human capital needs that were, I think, put out, was it 2012 or so? I'm not sure that I've seen that anyone else has come out with projections. I think yours or McKinsey still has the only set of projections, right?
I don't know that there's no one else, but yeah, are you just wondering either why there hasn't been more analysis of that or what the action is?
I just find I find it interesting that I don't think our federal government has come up with projections. So I've been checking around too. I mean, it's a really fascinating set of projections, and it lists out all the disciplines by, I think, 4 to 5 categories in terms of needs out to, what, 2016 or 2018. But it still seems to be kind of a gold standard in a way for projections.
Right.
So I was just curious if anyone else had done that or not.
I think the closest is STEM education, which has been a priority of this administration, and STEM education for women in particular as well. But I think part of the power of that projection is that companies are feeling it credibly enough that either there wasn't another institute or organization that wanted to test them, but maybe part of your point is there enough activity around tackling the gap? And education is a difficult system to move nimbly, which is why some of these education to employment consortiums are beneficial, because talk about carrot and stick, so many community colleges and private colleges are looking for employment statistics at graduation, and to think that you have partnerships. Now, City of Chicago has pioneered one with 200 companies in Chicago, the community college network there, and is adapting real time to, like, Coyote Logistics is a good example of a company that does a lot of big data analytics and Internet of Things on shipping and manufacturing and transportation. And they're part of this collaborative of 200 companies with the City of Chicago and the community college system, because people want to be employed. So it would be, I'll go back and see as well, but it sounds like you've you've done the best research in the room, unless anyone else wants to answer the question.
It does also highlight, though, that just looking at STEM is not really sufficient. I mean, there is this dilemma of jobs without people and people without jobs that is out there, but obviously you can't take a chemist and say immediately you're going to become a data scientist. And so specificity is key, and I think we all look to McKinsey for a lot of great research in this area. So.
Another question? Okay, how about in the front?
Hi, I'm Eric Fisher from the Congressional Research Service at the Library of Congress, and I'm wondering if any of you could talk about what your views are on how with respect to security, how Internet of Things sort of fits in to the NIST framework and some of the work that like DHS is doing at the NCIC on industrial control systems.
Kind of feel like
Okay, that's actually a very good question in the sense that security and innovation is almost like two sides of the coin. So IoT, even IoT is not any different. If one side goes too fast, the other side we're going to have a problem. So how does it fit into those existing frames and things like that? I mean, there are a lot of obviously different ways to fit in. The main difference in IoT from security perspective is that a lot of times you have to focus on resiliency as much as prevention. So prevention means that you stop whatever is coming in, which has been number one goal of a lot of security systems and industrial systems too. But at the same time, what you have to look at is if there are like too many devices, there are too many different protocols, there are too many different operating systems, then at the end of the day, you have to think about what is the next step, which means if a part of the system somehow is having a little trouble, then what does that mean? What is the impact? And how do you recover it as soon as possible, and how do you get to a status that is fully operational? So it's not that there's only one single bullet, and security is almost like something that you have no answer whatsoever. I mean, whatever you do, there's always new questions. Right? That's great for security industry. That's how they do things. IoT is not any different, but there will be a new set of questions, of course. Right?
So DHS is engaged in trying to do a lot of good work in this area, but part of it, security is, we have to reframe how we think about security. So cybersecurity today is like 21st century urban warfare versus medieval warfare with walls. Many corporate decision makers still think that this is like the siege of Constantinople or something like that, but really they're in your system. If you're Citibank and you have 4.5 times the number of devices as you do employees connected to your system, probably there's a vulnerability there. And the core in terms of dealing with the cyber challenge is information sharing and standards. Now, one of the challenges in the U.S. system is that everybody's involved in this. Every association has their own standard. Every association wants to lead on this. And what you really need is to think about how do you do information sharing in a systemic fashion, and to the extent possible, how can somebody like a DHS, perhaps in a leadership role, drive some of that out into the system? In fact, what I'm involved in Canada now is actually sitting all of the industry around a table and trying to come up with a common approach. Now, you can do that in a smaller country, but it does go to the core issue of how do you actually get the information sharing around a common set of problems and a common set of questions. And if you can't do that, then securing high-value targets like government systems remains challenging, but securing your toaster or your fridge becomes really challenging.
All right, another audience question? Okay, there in the middle in the back.
Hi there, Brandon Wilkerson from the National Defense University. You talked a little bit about the importance of government taking the lead on privacy, solving the privacy issue. There seems to be, we're at loggerheads in Congress. Is that the place to solve this privacy issue, or what are some of the approaches to maybe start breaking down the walls on this privacy issues?
So I was with one of the FTC commissioners yesterday, and they've done some really, really good work in this area. So the first step to dealing with the privacy issue is understanding both what the challenge is, where the trade-offs are, and what the economic implications are of not doing this. And so the obvious way forward would be for Congress to do something, but there are, shall we say, challenges associated with getting bipartisan agreement to make that happen. A good first step undertaken by the Obama administration was the work done by Danny Weitzner when he was at the White House and at the OECD, dealing with privacy principles. That's been something that's really been important. But a lot of this is actually learned practice and evolving the informal structures of compliance with certain aspects of law to this new challenge. And so it is happening organically. It could use a boost from the leadership that legislation in Congress would provide. But I think part of the issue is that privacy is seen more as a social issue or a social convention rather than as a core economic issue. But in order to get around that, what you also need are the big global producers of goods and services in the information technology space to step up and say, look, we are having challenges in the Indian market or in the Japanese market or in the European market because of this. Everybody's dealing with it in a different way. It's challenging. And the other question I'll put on the table before I stop is the state level. California, for example, has been very, very engaged in this particular area. So much like you saw in the mid to late 2000s with fuel economy for automobiles, it may actually be California that drives the solution to this. And, well, some in the country may think that they're in the right place. I'm not sure everybody does, and it's important to have a national debate about what this thing should look like.
So speaking from the congressional perspective and admitting that we have been very deliberative on this issue, I think that's for a couple of reasons. One, as you mentioned, these are largely state-based regimes. And so I think we try to proceed with a lot of caution before we do things that are overruling what's happening at the state level. I think also on privacy in particular, there's a feeling of first do no harm. There is a real awareness of the risk if we get it wrong. Culturally we're different than Europe, but you can see some of the economic costs of what their approach has been on these issues. And so I think we just want to make sure that we look at it very carefully. It's not a purely partisan issue, and I think that's a positive thing. We've got a bipartisan working group that's been having stakeholder meetings and discussions and policy debates to try to come to the right conclusion. Not to be able to just say, we've done something about privacy, but to make sure that when we act, it's the right thing and we don't damage the real potential that's here.
Thanks. Well, we're just about out of time, but if any of the panelists would like to add 1 minute and 1 second of commentary, I welcome that.
I'll go next.
Yeah.
I like talking, so that's, as you can see. So IoT is extremely great opportunity for every industry, and not just industry, for universities, research, and governments too. Question is, how do you actually move this forward faster than others? How to accelerate it? I mean, this is happening. I mean, even if you don't do anything, it will happen, right? No matter what, it will happen. From the perspective of the U.S. government, question is, how can you make U.S. at the forefront of this innovation? And then if there will be huge market, huge advantages, who's going to get those markets, who's going to advantage. Now that's one big question. And to make that happen, really, we should stop talking and start doing things. Okay, that's kind of what I always say. I mean, we should not stop talking, but in addition to talking, showing great presentations and animations, nice stories and scenarios that you wake up in the morning, there is a temperature, shower, TV turns on automatically based on your mood, which channel you want to see. Great stories and great scenarios. At the end of the day, you have to look at what are the real benefits. What are the real business cases? And you have to focus on that before you start even talking about communication protocols and which sensor you put in. Because at the end of the day, that's what matters.
Amen to that. Please thank our panel with me. And we'll come back to Danny Castro for a final remark.
Well, thanks to everyone today. Thanks to this panel. Thanks to Travis for this last moderating this last panel. I'd like to just close by saying I think today we've gone through obviously a number of different perspectives on the Internet of Things, and it's clear that there's a lot of challenges. There's huge opportunities though. There's huge potential benefits, and importantly, I think there's many ways that the government can be pressing forward in this area. Not only through taking a very smart and focused approach on regulation, but also through legislation, also through executive action at the federal, state, and the local level. So thanks to everyone for coming out today. Thank you again to our sponsors, Intel, Toyota, Verizon, US Telecom. Thanks to our media partner, the Christian Science Monitor, and Passcode and Vertical. And thanks again to all of our panelists today, and thanks to all of you for coming out and participating. Thank you.